Hi, this video is made possible by your support, and it starts with the main character's alarm clock rang. He woke up and went to the bathroom. The guy's name was Shu Xiaowen. The boy reached out to the cup with the toothbrush to brush his teeth. Shu looked at his reflection in the mirror. The guy remembered that he was already 24 years old. The protagonist reached out his hand and grabbed the clothes on the chair. Shu quickly threw on his clothes and prepared to run out of the house. He thought he was living a wonderful life. The protagonist was descending the stairs of a building to the ground floor. Near the entrance, two pensioners were playing cards at a table. The landlady sternly reminded the boy that it was time for him to pay the rent. The money had to be paid by the weekend. Shu told the old woman that he understood. The pensioner grabbed her husband by the clothes and shouted that he had cheated. Shu prepared to get on his scooter. He remembered that his parents had sent him away from home when he grew up. The guy didn't have a diploma, and so he had to fight for any job. Shu put the helmet on his head. He received a message that he had a new order, and he had to check it. The protagonist checked his phone for time. He prepared to leave to fulfill the order. Shu was racing down the street at full speed on a scooter. The sidewalks were deserted. The main character flew past the superhero. The hero, meanwhile, was pursuing the bandit in flight and demanded that he lower his weapon. The bandit ran down the street at full speed and shouted to his pursuer that he wouldn't be able to catch up with him. The superhero shouted loudly that for him it was all very simple. The ball in his hands caught fire. The hero attacked the bandit with a fireball. The criminal jumped up and screamed that he was hot. The superhero joyfully shouted that he would receive a great reward for the criminal. A passerby told his friend that without superheroes, it would be dangerous to walk on the streets. The guy told his partner that after the opening of the superhero headquarters, there were more criminals in the city. A very bright explosion was heard in the building. People on Earth were very scared. A superhero in a green suit held a girl in his arms and descended from a building on a rope. The hero carefully put the girl on the ground and said that she was now safe. The stranger touched the hero's chest with her hand and thanked him. The savior smiled at the people around him and told them to thank him and leave 5 stars in their review. The protagonist noticed a superhero jumping up on a rope above the street as he walked. Surprised passersby watched the whole thing. Shu rode his moped up to the store. He remembered that in his past life he was a cultivator. The seller held a bag in his hands. He told the guy with a smile that he had a dozen orders a day. He asked if the guy had enough money to live on. The man handed the protagonist bags of food. He told him that his customers were writing glowing reviews about him. Shu could deliver more orders and become the #1 couriers. The protagonist was afraid that he could become the first. He held the packages with the order in his hands. The man became agitated. He closely examined the protagonist. Shu turned to leave. Shu drove away from the store. The man looked after him for a long time and intently. The seller looked at the main character with fear and said to himself that he might have answered the guy wrong. Shu was driving down the street. He thought with displeasure that each of his lives ended at 25. The guy had a poor memory of his past reincarnations. In all his past lives, he had become the best at everything he did. In his past lives, the guy regularly had accidents and died. Yu remembered that in one of his past lives he became a successful ruler and sat on the throne. Handmaiden stood nearby. The guy on the throne said to himself in a joyful voice that he would never die in this life. Suddenly the ruler felt sick and choked on his food. The boy fell to the ground dead. He choked on a melon seed. The maids were very scared. The protagonist was driving down the street. He decided not to waste his energy in this life and to follow his plan. He wanted to live to be 80. The guy overheard a conversation in an alley. Someone sternly demanded cash from his partner instead of a card. The girl ran down the street with her hand outstretched. She shouted at someone to get out. The protagonist stood and watched the stranger closely. She ran in his direction. Shu was very surprised to see how the girl jumped at full speed and flew over him. During the flight, the stranger unexpectedly caught her body on the main character, and he began to fall off the moped. The main character was lying on the ground. A stranger fell on top of him. Shu came to his senses and grabbed his head with his hand. He wanted to tell the girl that he needed something. The stranger screamed at the guy in fear that she needed help. She said someone was trying to rob her. The main character, lying on the ground, told the stranger that if she was afraid to call the police, she could call superheroes. The girl was very scared and unhappy. She turned around and looked away. The stranger pleaded with the protagonist for help. She said she was afraid and could be killed. Shu was deep in thought. He didn't know if he should help the stranger now. The girl looked at the guy with displeasure and decided that he was counting money and time. The guy turned around with displeasure. and told the girl that he wanted to sit in silence for a minute and count. The stranger asked her partner in surprise if he had any superpowers and could read minds. Shu turned his head to the side and told the girl that she was very predictable. He asked her to slow down. A bandit appeared from the side of the alley. He sternly asked the girl how she dared to run away from him. The bandit's name was Lin Kui. He was a professional thug and had the ability to deal with cold. He angrily demanded that the girl pay his debts. Lin glared at the girl next to the main character and said that an ordinary courier would not help her pay off her debts. The protagonist pushed the girl aside with his hand. He remembered that he needed to make it on time. The stranger sternly asked the guy why he was pushing her away. The stranger grabbed the protagonist by the clothes. She didn't want him to leave her here alone. The girl held the guy by his clothes and asked, "Will he really just leave her like that?" Shu replied that he had to leave. Lin approached the main character and sternly told him to get down to business. Yu sat on the moped, very unhappy. The girl behind him angrily asked, "What kind of person is he?" Lin grabbed the guy by the clothes and sternly asked why he was looking down on him. Flying blue shards appeared around the bandit. He angrily told the guy not to dare speak to him in such a tone. The bandit sternly told the protagonist that he was the leader of the local slums. No one dared look down on him. The main character put his hand to his head and said in a dissatisfied voice that all this was very troublesome. Lin noticed with fear how the guy in front of him suddenly disappeared somewhere. The bandit looked ahead in fear and noticed that the guy had disappeared somewhere. Shu jumped on the bully from the side and prepared to kick him with all his might. The main character kicked the frightened bandit with all his might while in flight. Lin didn't have time to defend himself from the blow. The guy's foot hit him straight in the face. The main character swung his leg with all his might and hit the attacker in the stomach with it. Lin flew far to the side in an alley after a strong attack from the guy. The angry bandit stretched his hands out in front of him. He decided to use the ice shield to protect himself from the attack. Lin saw a huge force in front of him and became frightened. A huge predatory dragon with an open mouth appeared in front of him. The main character suddenly jumped up and swung his leg at his opponent. There was a very loud explosion and bright fire. Shu flew far to the side. The protagonist glanced to the side and noticed the attacking bandit lying in a hole in the wall. A frightened Shu anxiously reminded himself that he needed to make the delivery on time. The girl was surprised that the protagonist defeated a level 4 opponent with one hit. Shu prepared to dismount his moped and wanted to make up for lost time. The stranger watched the protagonist with concern. She reached into her bag to get something. The stranger held a phone in her hands. Some kind of sensors glowed on the screen. The girl looked at the phone's monitor with interest. She saw a computer image of the protagonist driving away. The stranger looked at her phone with excitement and did not understand who the main character was. Shu approached the customer's door with a phone in his hand. The buyer did not answer the call. The protagonist wrote a message on his phone, instructing the customer to pick up his order from the door handle. Shu hung the bag on the door handle and turned to leave. He thought to himself that he had made it just in time. A girl on the street happily watched as the police carried away the hooligan. She decided to herself that she could wait a little longer to pay off her debt. The girl turned to the side and noticed a message coming to her phone. The stranger read a message from the protagonist. He wrote to the client that his order was hanging on the doorknob. The main character was having a bad day. The building owner raised his rent. Shu had to pay 500 yen a month for housing. The price increase ruined all his plans. The protagonist sat at the computer and counted his expenses. He needed to pick up at least 120 orders every month. Shu glanced at his phone with displeasure. He calculated that he needed to fulfill 360 orders in 3 days. The owner of the building offered the main character to rent a smaller room. The protagonist found an ad online for a room for rent on Shu Street, close to public transportation. The price was only 400 yen per month. Shu imagined being found dead and became terrified. Shu thought to himself with displeasure that he could not spread his influence. He was afraid that he might become number 1. The main character was surprised to notice on the computer that he received a response very quickly. The owner wrote to the client online asking him to leave contact information. Shu was surprised that there were still people on such crowded forums. The guy was dissatisfied that everything in his life had started to go smoothly again. The partner sent the main character a very precise address of the apartment and offered to come over. Shu thought to himself that such an indifferent answer on the internet might be skimmed over. He decided to play it safe. The guy stretched in his chair and remembered it was already 10 o'clock. He had to go to work. The main character was riding a moped down the street. A battle between superheroes and villains was taking place all around. There were explosions everywhere. Shu rode up on a moped and stopped near the building. A superhero was flying above him. The guy thought to himself that the longer he lived, the more likely he was to become number one in any field. The protagonist remembered that he had almost forgotten his previous lives. In one of those lives, he was an unknown artist. He even helped his friend draw something. The film was viewed so many times in one day that the tablet eventually malfunctioned and the main character was electrocuted. The protagonist removed his helmet. He thought to himself that he had enough money from deliveries for now. He decided that being a courier was safe for him. Zhu happily told himself that he had delivered the order on time and lived another day. The protagonist held the phone in his hands. It was already 6 o'clock and 30 minutes. The renter was supposed to arrive soon. The guy was climbing the stairs. He calculated to himself that he could rent out a third room. Shu was delighted and thought to himself that misfortune had helped him. The main character looked in surprise and saw an unfamiliar girl standing in front of him. Yu stood to the side and looked at the stranger with interest. She was holding a suitcase in her hands. The stranger looked at the protagonist in surprise. She recognized him. Shu asked his interlocutor, "Is it really she who contacted him this morning?" The girl asked the guy, "Is this really his apartment?" The protagonist stood near the door and told the girl that her room was inside. She approached him and said that she didn't know what happened that day. Shu looked at his interlocutor and asked, "What does this have to do with him?" The stranger pointed to the side and explained to the guy that this instrument belonged to the association. They track everything. The interlocutor glanced slyly at the protagonist and said that she was being chased that day because of debts. She had no home and no money. Isha told the girl in a stern voice to return the money if she borrowed it. The stranger opened the door to the room. She told the guy with a smile that he shouldn't leave her outside. Shu replied angrily to his new acquaintance that he hadn't allowed her to stay there. The stranger stood inside the room. The protagonist threatened to call the police and demanded that she leave with her things. The girl very slyly rushed at the main character and smiled silently. The interlocutor glanced at the protagonist and slyly remarked that he had made it so that she couldn't read his thoughts. The association wouldn't have let an unregistered person with 6th-level abilities through. The girl looked angrily at the guy and said that he had a big secret. Zhu angrily told his interlocutor that if he killed her, no one would know about this secret. The girl started taking off her shoes and walked into the room. She said she wanted to live here because the windows faced the sunny side. The stranger looked around the room carefully and said that it needed to be painted pink. New furniture also needed to be bought. Yu sternly asked the girl, didn't she understand what he just told her? The guest slyly told the guy he wouldn't kill her anyway. She was taking off her outerwear. Shu became agitated and shouted at his interlocutor that she couldn't just undress in someone else's house. The stranger looked at the guy with displeasure and said that this would now be her home. She could wear the most comfortable clothes here. The protagonist pointed angrily at the girl. He shouted that something bad could happen. The woman was sitting on the couch. She told the guy that she was the head of the association's information department. The stranger confirmed that no storm was expected. The main character asked his interlocutor in surprise, "Is she really the head of the department?" The stranger sat on the sofa and answered the guy with a smile that she was the real head of the department. The girl seemed to ask the guy to rent her a room. She said she could give him a deposit. Shu was very irritated. He looked at the girl with displeasure. The guy looked closely at the money in the stranger's hands and prepared to take it. Shu turned away and told the girl that she wouldn't leave him alone until he agreed to rent her a room. The stranger was delighted. The main character stopped in the room and looked at his new neighbor in surprise. The girl on the couch smiled slyly at the guy. She suggested that he do something. A stranger in the protagonist's apartment suggested that he take on a very important matter. The girl was lying on the bed and looked slyly at the guy. She asked him if he wanted to know what they would do. Shu looked at the girl with displeasure and said that he didn't want anything at all. The stranger sat up in bed and told the boy that she could ease his suffering. The girl raised her finger up and told the main character that he would die if he became number one. The main character sternly asked his interlocutor, "How does she know all this?" The girl slyly answered the guy that you can find out about everything if you set yourself that goal. The main character sternly asked his interlocutor, "Is she really stalking him?" The stranger told the guy that she used to be the head of the association's intelligence department. She kept an eye on suspicious objects. The girl asked the guy if he was interested. Zhu turned away and told the girl in a displeased voice that she only found out his secret because of his carelessness. He didn't want to discuss anything with her anymore. The stranger came close to the guy and said that he didn't want such an important secret to come out. The main character asked his interlocutor with displeasure what she wanted. The girl explained to the protagonist that she just wanted to get rich. She had nothing against him. The main character looked at the stranger silently and displeasedly. He didn't answer her. The interlocutor told the guy in a serious voice that he was at the 6th level of abilities. The girl sat up on the bed. She told the guy that he didn't dare join the association because of fear. The stranger told her partner that if he joined the association, he wouldn't have to participate in testing. He wouldn't have to work himself to death or worry about his well-being. Shu replied to the girl that she was using her position to help him. He didn't understand why she was doing this. The stranger looked calmly at the guy and said that she was doing all this for money. The stranger told the protagonist that he could receive 500 yen a month from the association for completed tasks. She told the protagonist that they would split the proceeds equally. The guy sternly asked the girl if she wasn't afraid he'd report her. The stranger told her partner he wouldn't do that unless he wanted to die again. The girl looked slyly at her partner and explained that she found rare talents for the association. She could protect him and earn money. There was a loud knock at the door. The main character said that the owner of the house had arrived and decided to open the door for him. Shu abruptly extended his hand to the front door and prepared to open it. The main character asked the stranger at the door with displeasure, "Who is she?" The girl stood and held a suitcase in her hands. She told the guy that her name was Van Eyck, and she wanted to rent a room in this place. Shu, frightened and surprised, noted to himself that a beauty was standing in front of him. Van anxiously asked the guy if she had really caused him any inconvenience. He hadn't responded to her online rental offer. The girl found Shu at the address. Shu told the girl with a smile that he was still looking for a tenant. He had to go to work in the morning and therefore did not answer her. The protagonist gestured for the girl to come into the apartment. Van thanked him. Shu thought to himself with fear that he had deleted his post about renting online. This post could have become very popular and reached the #1 spot. The girl with a suitcase entered the apartment and looked around carefully. The guest entered the apartment and looked around carefully. She didn't know which room she would live in. At that moment, a stranger entered the room. She glanced at Van and asked with displeasure, "Who is this in front of her?" Van looked at the stranger in surprise and said that she had come to rent a room here. The cheerful stranger hugged the guest and said that she was very nice and could rent a room. The girl said her name was Lin Meow Meow and she had just moved here. Wang happily told her new friend that they would live together in harmony. Shu glared at the girls and shouted at them to move away quickly. Lin hugged her new girlfriend and asked the guy with displeasure, "Why should she leave?" Suddenly, a very strong explosion was heard in the room. The girls got scared. The girlfriends looked to the side in fear and noticed a large hole appear in the ceiling. Shu pointed his finger to the side at the hole in the wall and told the girls that this was why they needed to move away. An unknown large fighter jumped from the ceiling through a hole into the room. The mercenary fell unconscious onto the floor of the room. There were clouds of dust all around. The girls looked at the stranger with fear and asked if this was really a terrorist attack. A dangerous and huge fighter appeared from the side. He sternly said that only a person with 3rd-level abilities dared to challenge him. Lucas was a member of the 3rd squad. He possessed 5 abilities. The mercenary said in an angry voice that the people of the association shouldn't overestimate their abilities. Lin picked up her phone and used it to look at Lucas. The girl carefully studied the fighter's body through the sensors in her phone. Lin shouted in a frightened voice that the fighter was on the 5th level and was a criminal. Van shouted in a frightened voice that she herself only had the 3rd level. Lucas stood in clouds of dust. He asked the girl, "Is she also from the association?" Lin demanded that the bandit surrender quickly. The association was supposed to send reinforcements soon. Lin thought to herself with excitement that all the members of the association must have heard about the explosion. She just needed to stall for a little while. Lucas angrily told the girl that he was from the 3rd squad and wasn't afraid of any association. Lin angrily replied to the criminal that she was catching members of the 3rd squad gang. Lin thought to herself with excitement that the current attack was a good opportunity to test the protagonist's abilities. The girl asked the guy angrily and discontentedly, "What is he doing?" The protagonist was covering a hole in the wall with duct tape. He replied to the girl in a disgruntled voice that he was patching up the hole. Shu thought to himself with displeasure that his death ability would soon begin to take effect. He remembered that he had been taking a lot of risks lately. He needed to be more careful. The girl shouted in fear to the protagonist that there was a level 5 criminal in their house. The guy told the girls that it was their problem, as he was just a regular courier. The girl approached the main character and grabbed his clothes with her hand. Lin held her friend's clothes with her hand and reminded him that with great power comes great responsibility. The main character calmly answered the girl that he had never even graduated from kindergarten. Van shouted in a frightened voice to her friends that now was not the time for them to argue. The bandit was very angry. Lucas walked towards the girls. He looked very angry. Van rushed to her friend in fear and said that the bandits were coming here. She didn't know what to do. Lucas rushed forward to run at the girls and shouted that they were the scum of the association. The bandit rushed at the girls in flight and shouted angrily that they would die. The tench looked ahead in fear and realized that she had nowhere to run. The bandit swung his arm with all his might to hit the guy. Shu thrust his fist forward and defended himself. The main character turned to the side and looked at the girl lying on the ground. Lin looked at the guy in surprise and said that he saved them all. Lucas sternly told the protagonist that he was able to stop his blow. Shu thought to himself with displeasure that in all worlds, villains spoke the same cliched phrases. The bandit got angry. He told the protagonist that he himself should become more serious. Lucas began to warm up his hands before the attack. His body darkened. The bandit slammed his hand into the ground with all his might. He shouted at the protagonist that he respected his strength. Lucas looked sternly at the guy and asked if he knew what hell was. Yu said in a dissatisfied voice that he himself works in hell. He asked the bandit if he had ever worked as a courier. Lucas got angry and rushed at full speed against his opponent. The bandit swung and hit the wall with all his might. The protagonist managed to dodge. Shu glanced at his opponent and in a stern voice demanded that he pay for the repairs. Lucas sternly shouted at the guy that if he died, he wouldn't need any repairs. Shu sternly explained to his partner that the word death did not exist in his personal vocabulary. The bandit continued to attack the protagonist from all sides. The guy continued to deftly dodge. The main character turned around and looked to the side at the destroyed apartment in surprise. Shu ran up in fear and noticed that his sofa was badly damaged. The protagonist glanced to the side and shouted that his refrigerator had been damaged. Lucas placed his hand on top of the broken refrigerator. Lucas looked at the guy very angrily and said that he was very strong. The main character ran to the refrigerator and announced in a cheerful voice that it wasn't working. A surprised bandit looked at him. Lucas looked sternly at the guy and demanded that he quickly become more serious. The main character swung his hand sharply and hit the surprised bandit in the face. After a very powerful blow from the guy, Lucas flew back and crashed through the ceiling. Shu shouted after the bandit that he would need to fulfill a lot of orders to get the repairs done. The bandit, after a very powerful blow from the main character, flew high above the ground into the stratosphere. Yu sat frightened and looked at the refrigerator. He didn't know what to do. Surprised girls stood nearby. The guy was wrapping the refrigerator with duct tape. He said the furniture belonged to the landlord and hoped the man wouldn't raise the rent. Lin glanced sideways at the protagonist and decided he had the gift of mind reading. The girl dreamily told herself that she would definitely get rich. A fighter woke up at the side. He told the surprised girls about Lucas, a level 5 criminal. The fighter sat down near the wall and asked the girls who they were. The protagonist was standing near the refrigerator. He asked the guy when he woke up. The fighter put his hand to his head and said that he passed out at the very beginning of the fight. The protagonist asked the girl what they would do. Their squad was supposed to arrive soon. Lin thought fearfully to herself that no one should know about the protagonist's true abilities. Shu had an argument with his girlfriend. He angrily told her that after their meeting, troubles had befallen him. Lin angrily replied to her partner that she herself had suffered greatly. Van watched everything closely from the side. Van thought about it and realized that the main character and his girlfriend didn't want anyone to know about everything that had happened. Van told her partners in a surprised voice that she could help them. The girl extended her hand forward and a bright pink glow appeared near her finger. Van extended her hand forward and told the fighter that he was fighting Lucas. The guy got scared. He asked the girl what she was doing. Van touched his forehead with her finger. Lin told the protagonist with surprise that Wang had a special ability. The protagonist replied that this was a very reliable method. The fighter sat on the ground and repeated to himself that he was fighting Lucas. Van looked happily at the guy and told him with a smile that everything was ready. The girl told her partners in a cunning voice that she had replaced the fighter's memories. Lin couldn't understand why the girl still hadn't registered with the association. Van was skilled in hypnosis. Hypnosis and mind reading are very rare abilities. Those who possess these abilities are the first to register with the association. Such special skills open many doors. Lin glanced slyly at the protagonist and thought that their life together would be very interesting. A group of girls appeared from the side. They asked permission to enter. Shu continued wrapping the broken refrigerator with duct tape. The main character looked out through a hole in the wall and asked the guests who they were. The stranger introduced herself and said they were members of the association's cleanup squad. Her name was Jin Shan. She was the secretary to the cleanup squad leader and asked the guy if they could come in. Shu looked closely at the girls and said that of course they could come in. The cleanup department is responsible for cleaning up the aftermath of the battles and calming the population. Jin bowed and greeted her boss. At this time, Lin saw a guy still lying on the ground next to the girl, half conscious. Lin pointed her hand at the fighter and said that he was able to defeat Lucas. Jin asked the boss with a dissatisfied voice, "Was the guy really able to defeat a level 5 criminal?" Lin pointed her finger to the side at the protagonist near the hole in the wall and said that Shu helped Liu Kai defeat the bandit. Jin thanked her boss for the information. She promised to report everything to the association. After reviewing the report, the protagonist was to receive compensation for the damages within 3 days. Jin looked sideways at the protagonist and said that this guy was not registered in the association. Lin smiled slyly and said that she would help the guy register. She thanked her subordinate for her hard work. Jin smiled at her boss. At that moment, workers approached from the side and took the bandit's body away on a stretcher. Workers carried Lucas's body away on a stretcher. Jin thanked the protagonist for the inconvenience. The girl handed the girl a business card and said that she could call her if she needed help. Lin held out her business card and smiled, telling Jin not to worry. The subordinate looked at her boss Lin and said that she agreed with her. The girl waved her hand to the guy and told him to follow her. Shu looked at her with excitement. The protagonist slyly asked the girl if she would rent a room after what happened. Van answered the guy that she would still rent it. Shu told his interlocutor that she should go and rest. They would discuss the rent a little later. Wang told the guy that she would leave. Lin told the protagonist to come to her and slammed the door behind her. Van silently looked after the protagonist before she left. Shu turned around and asked Lin what she wanted to discuss with him. The girl stood near the mirror. She told the guy that tomorrow she would help him register with the association. Shu would have to show the necessary documents. The protagonist told the girl in a dissatisfied voice that he still hadn't given her his consent. He was unhappy that she had decided everything for him. The girl turned away and reminded the guy that she had already told Jin that she would register him. If she didn't take any action, the association would start keeping an eye on the main character. Lin turned around and explained to the guy that Jin didn't believe that he could defeat Lucas with his own hands. The protagonist looked sadly at the floor in front of him. He said he didn't want to get involved with the association. His girlfriend asked him not to refuse her offer. Lin reminded her partner with a smile that he would be able to have a stable income. The girlfriend looked slyly at the guy and said that she wanted to persuade him using other methods. Zhu responded to the girl with displeasure that she was the head of the information department, and he did not like such hints. Lin smiled slyly at the guy and said that she was just joking. The girl smiled slyly and told the main character that she wanted to earn some money and pay off her debts. The girlfriend strongly advised the guy not to refuse the lucrative offer. Lin hugged the protagonist and pressed him to herself. She slyly asked him, what does he want to tell her? The main character, standing near the girl's chest, fearfully asked her for time to think everything over. Lin answered the protagonist with a smile that she was giving him until 9 in the morning. The girl left the room and slammed the door. The protagonist didn't know what to do. Shu walked around the room in slippers. A spider appeared near his foot. The guy told himself that he wanted to think about the girl's words. The main character stepped forward and crushed the frightened spider with his foot. The spider was crushed after the guy's attack. It couldn't move on the floor. Suddenly, the insect's legs regained strength and it began to recover. The insect recovered and the spider jumped to its paws. It made quiet sounds. The main character took a whole large stack of paper and nailed the spider to the floor. Yu sat on the floor and looked at the nailed insect with a dissatisfied look. The guy glanced at the insect marks on the stack of papers. He said in a disgruntled voice that there had been a lot of spiders lately. A frightened guy in the room fell to the floor and screamed, "The woman has mercy on me!" Insects were crawling on him. The stranger promised to give him all the money he had. The woman reached out to the frightened guy and grabbed his face. She slyly told him that she didn't need money. A huge and predatory spider crushed the guy and screamed that she wanted him. The man looked to the side in fear and noticed insects running over him. The spider angrily demanded that the guy satisfy her completely. The woman took off the guy's outerwear and shouted that together they would make a lot of little spiders. The spider took the clothes off the guy's body and looked at him with great displeasure. The stranger looked around and said he was afraid of pain. There were small spiders on the floor around him. The demonic woman became very angry. Her eyes began to glow brightly with a green light. The spider threw up her hands in dissatisfaction and told the guy he was no good. The man, frightened, continued shouting at the woman that he would do whatever she wanted for her. A huge number of spiders crawled onto the guy's body and he screamed in fear. The stranger looked ahead in fear. Spiders had completely covered his entire body. Very quickly, predatory insects ate all the man's flesh, and only a skeleton remained. The spider looked around and said that she wanted to stay in this apartment for a while. The woman commanded the insects to help her change her clothes. There was green smoke around her. Insects crawled over the woman's body. They covered her completely. A huge swarm of small spiders completely covered the lady's body and ran around her on the floor. The demonic woman told herself that she could keep this appearance. Little spiders were running around her. The lady's body became attractive. She told herself that she needed to spend poison to maintain such a form. The spider licked her lips and commanded the insects to bring her some food. A huge number of spiders ran through the door into the house. The lady took off her shoes and sat on the floor. The spider happily told herself that she could now rest a little. A girl heard a message on her phone about a city infested with tarantulas. Citizens were warned to be careful and close windows and doors. The protagonist stood next to a huge hole in the wall and tried to patch it. He turned around and asked the girl why she was looking at him. Lynn held the phone in her hands. She told her friend that this news was somehow strange. The protagonist stood near the hole in the wall. He said there was nothing strange about spiders settling in. The guy turned around and reminded the girl that she was supposed to work today. He asked why she still hadn't changed her clothes. Lynn told the guy that the association gave her the day off. The organization found out that she was renting an apartment with him. The girl grabbed the main character by the hand and asked if he wanted to join the association. Lynn came close to the guy and touched him with her chest. Suddenly, the boy and girl became very scared. They heard someone calling for help from the side. Lynn and the main character turned around and asked the girl what had happened. Van, very frightened, opened the door on the run and ran into the room. The girl ran into the room and screamed that there were a lot of spiders around her. The main character and his friend looked at her in surprise. Van ran in slippers and asked for help. Many insects ran along the floor after her. Lynn began to angrily crush the insects with her foot. The frightened Van jumped onto the sofa. The girl turned around angrily and asked the main character to come and help her. Yu stood there, very confused and frightened. He raised his hand in front of him. Lynn told her friend in a dissatisfied voice that he was afraid of spiders. Shu became even more frightened. He looked at the girl silently and didn't know what to say to her. Lynn continued to crush the insects with her foot. She told the guy to help her. She couldn't cope on her own anymore. The guy ran up to the girl from the side and told her to move away a little. The girlfriend turned around and asked the main character what he wanted to do. A bright flame appeared in the boy's hand. He prepared to use it to attack the insects. The protagonist launched fire from his hand. A large burning monster flew across the room. The fire spread throughout the room and a bright explosion was heard. Lynn was very scared. Lynn looked ahead in fear. She didn't understand what was happening. The main character put his hand to his chest and told the girls that spiders were his worst enemies. Lynn was very surprised when she realized that her friend possessed fire magic. Ju reminded his girlfriend that she could read his mind. He told her that she could guess. Lynn angrily demanded that the protagonist not dare to pry into her thoughts either. The girl very displeasedly told the guy mentally that he was a scoundrel. The main character was holding a phone in his hands. He told the girls that he needed to leave and that they could clean the house. Van looked at the guy with great concern. She didn't know what to say to him. Lynn angrily told the protagonist that all public establishments were closed today and he didn't need to go anywhere. The main character was very scared. He realized that he was left without a job. Lynn showed the guy her phone. She said he could read everything online. The establishments were closed because of spiders. Shu read a message on his phone. Small spiders were blamed for many of the deaths. The main character looked attentively at his phone. He continued reading news about spiders. Shu proudly told his girlfriends that he did not want to die from a spider bite in this life. The lady was sitting in the building and sneezed loudly. She thought someone was scolding her behind her back. The spider looked ahead and took out a small handkerchief to wipe her face. Suddenly, a girl with 2 pistols jumped into the broken window. Husin was the secretary of the head of a level 4 combat unit. She shouted at the spider that she had come to arrest her on behalf of the association. The spider on the sofa said angrily that she had not expected the association's agents to find her location so quickly. The lady asked Shin angrily, "Did she really think that she could lay down her arms?" Blue looked angrily at the spider and shouted that this is exactly what she wants. The spider stood on her feet. She looked at the girl and said that she was disarmed. Suddenly, a lot of insects appeared on the lady's body. Her body turned green. Sun held the weapon forward and angrily asked the spider what she was doing. The lady told the girl that her weapons were her insects, which she loved very much. Sun told the lady in an angry voice that she refused to cooperate. She threatened to shoot her on the spot. The bullet flew past and pierced the spider's body. Sun looked happily at the woman's body, which was pierced through and through, and said that she had hit the bull's eye. The spiders very quickly crawled over the lady's body and began to heal her chest wound. The insect was able to heal the hole in the woman's body very quickly. It became smaller and smaller. Sun held the gun in her hand and looked at the spider, very angrily. The lady angrily told the girl that she would now show her her real abilities. After that, Sun would die. Van asked the protagonist in fear what she should do now. The two of them stood near the broken door. Zhu replied to the girl with displeasure that the screws in the door were loose because of what happened yesterday. He demanded that Lin also look at her room. He promised to fix it if anything was broken. The main character called the girl. Lin answered someone on the phone that she would come soon. The girl told her friend that she had received a call from the association asking her to come urgently. Shu asked his friend, didn't she have a day off? The girl told the protagonist that she would find a way to pay for the repairs. They could talk about everything else in the evening. Lin left the house through a hole in the wall. Wang said, surprised that the girl looked worried. Shu explained to her that it was all due to a spider infestation. He suggested that his friend fix the hole in the wall. The main character shouted to the girl in fear that a spider had appeared next to her. Van rushed to the guy and hugged him. She asked with fear, where is the spider? Shu noted with excitement that the girl's body was very soft. The guy picked up his shoe, and there was a crushed insect lying underneath. He told his girlfriend that he had crushed a spider. Van smiled at the protagonist and suggested that he quickly patch up the hole in the wall. Shu looked at the girl in bewilderment and asked what hole she was talking about. Van pointed to the hole in the wall and explained that this was the hole she was talking about. The girl arrived at the association's office. An employee with a folder behind him ran up to her and said he wanted to share information from the combat department with her. Lin asked her subordinate how the fairy secretary was feeling. The guy responded to his boss with excitement, saying that department head Xiao had arrived just in time and saved Secretary Fei. The girl had been seriously injured and taken to the hospital. Her life is no longer in danger. Lin was looking through the documents. She asked her subordinate, have they caught the criminal Aizhong? A subordinate near the elevator shouted to his superior that the criminal had escaped. She was seriously wounded by the department head. She could have gone into hibernation somewhere. The combat department is looking for her. Lin told her subordinate that information about Aizhong would be transferred to combat control shortly. The young man told his superior that he understood everything. The girl stood near the door. She couldn't understand why the fairy had lost to the spider woman. The elevator door opened and Jin was inside. She looked silently at her boss. The worker was holding a folder with documents in her hands. She greeted Lin. Lin looked at her subordinate and told her to help her with something. The main character was walking down the street. There were a lot of people around. A few days later, all the businesses and establishments in the city opened. Shu got on his moped. He thought the spider disaster was only getting worse. The main character looked closely and noticed a small spider sitting on his moped. Shu thought angrily that if the spiders didn't leave right now, he would burn them all. The angry protagonist raised his hand and prepared to throw the insect aside. The main character swung his hand and threw the spider far to the side. Shu walked up to the customer's door and knocked. He said he had a delivery. The door opened, and a fat customer wearing glasses came out. He took the food from the guy. The client turned around and walked into the apartment. He slammed the door in front of him. The main character walked away down the corridor with displeasure. He heard a sound from the telephone. The protagonist picked up his phone and started reading messages. The customer wrote that he found a spider in his food. He gave the delivery person 4 stars. The protagonist was overjoyed when a customer gave him 4 stars, which slowed down his rate of death. After a short pause, Shu told himself that he had no reason to rejoice. Past events had ruined his ideal plan. There were a lot of rats in the city alley next to the garbage bins. The insects surrounded the frightened rodent. The rat screamed loudly and wanted to escape. The beaten spider cried out in displeasure that she was in great pain because of the association. The woman sat on the floor in the alley. She said angrily that she would not forgive the association. The spider looked angrily at the insects and said that they would give her the blood they had sucked. The woman's eyes lit up brightly. She screamed for the spiders to fill her. Gradually, the woman's body began to recover. She said in a dissatisfied voice that this blood would not be enough. The spider looked away and said that she needed to find the man and suck him dry. A huge spider began to walk down the alley. Insects were running below her. The main character sat next to a moped. He said in a disgruntled voice that his vehicle had completely broken down. The main character looked at the moped and said to himself that he would need to spend some money. Suddenly, the guy heard a very suspicious noise from the side. Someone was approaching him. The main character saw a huge spider's paw appear on the side of the alley. The guy turned around and looked at the spider in surprise. The woman looked at him with displeasure. The guy was very surprised when he saw a big spider with a human body. The spider looked angrily at the guy and said that he was skinny, but he would do for her. A demonic woman with blazing eyes rushed at the guy and shouted for him to please her. A young monk named Shu went on a pilgrimage to India to retrieve sacred manuscripts. He was captured and tied up by spider women in a cave. The bound monk prayed to his deity. Opposite him stood predatory women. Shu told the women to stop spinning and embrace the true path. He suggested that they become parishioners of a Buddhist temple. One of the women asked the monk if it was written in his sacred texts that he could stay and play with them. The demonic women began shouting loudly and angrily at the monk to stay and play with them. One of them promised the boy to fulfill all his desires. Shu glanced at the women and thanked them for the invitation. He explained that he was not interested in anything. One of the demonesses ran up to the monk and said that they could not let him go. The woman touched her body with her hand and asked the guy to help them with something. Shu didn't succumb to the spider's seduction. He sat at his loom, spinning webs. One of the women told him that he used to make cotton fabric. The various demons and spirits that inhabit this world are looking for people who can work with their hands. This can help them find a chance at salvation. The monk presented a piece of silk to the woman and said that the fabric was ready. The demonic women smiled cheerfully and shouted to the guy that they were very happy. Suddenly, lightning struck from the sky above and struck the monarch dead. Monk Shu died after he created the most beautiful silk fabric in the world. The protagonist called out to the spider in a frightened voice in an alleyway. The woman told the guy that it was his own fault he met her. The man asked the demoness, "Is it really her fault for the disaster with the spiders?" The spider replied to the man that she only ate scumbags. She asked her partner if he had any last words. The spider glanced at the protagonist and said he looked very thin. She decided the victim would do. The main character sternly replied to the woman that he had no last words. The demoness looked slyly at the guy and said that she wanted love from him before death. Shu answered that he did not agree. The spider pointed at the guy and said that her venom could cause hallucinations. The protagonist will no longer have them before his death. The demonic woman suddenly jumped up from the ground and prepared to attack the guy. The protagonist decided to evade his rival's attack and abruptly disappeared from the scene. The spider was very surprised by his disappearance. The demoness looked around carefully and could not understand where the guy had disappeared to. The woman turned to the side and noticed with horror how the guy appeared behind her. Shu looked at the woman and asked if she was spinning thread. The spider looked angrily at the guy and asked, "Is he really interested in perversion?" The main character stretched out his hand forward and grabbed the spider's hand. The man grabbed the woman with all his strength and slammed her into the ground with all his might. Shu knocked the spider against the ground in all directions. He demanded that she spin the thread. The protagonist demanded that the unconscious spider's body spin so that she wouldn't feel bad about dying. The protagonist calmly walked down the evening street. Next to him on the ground lay the body of an unconscious demonic woman. Suddenly, the guy tripped over a can lying on the ground and started falling. The main character got really angry. He realized the spiders had tricked him with the fabric. After that, the guy swung his arm to hit the jar with all his might. Shu was walking calmly down the alley. Suddenly, a fighter appeared behind him. Liu grabbed the phone and fearfully told his partner that Aizhong had been defeated. Late in the evening, the main character was at home with his girlfriend. A tench ran into the room. She joyfully and smilingly shouted to her friends that she was back. Zhu sat with his friend on the couch. Wang asked the guest, "Has she really worked at the association for 2 whole days?" Lin shouted from the doorway to her friends that Aizhong had lost, but the demoness was still in the residential area. Shu thought to himself that he lost because the spider reminded him of something bad. Lin looked sternly at the protagonist. She studied him carefully with her gaze. Lin asked the guy telepathically, "Why didn't he tell her about this before?" Shu answered his interlocutor in his mind that he really couldn't help himself. The girl approached the guy and said that she had registered him in the association. She brought him an envelope with his salary for his victory over Lucas. The protagonist opened the envelope and took out the money. He told the girl that he didn't want to think about it. Sue took money out of the envelope and joyfully shouted to the girl that he was joining. Lin looked at the guy and said that next Monday he would go with her to the association and take up the new position. The main character woke up the next day on his bed at home. The sleepy guy on the bed turned to the side on the pillow and stretched out his arms. The main character opened one eye. Lying down, he noticed that someone was next to him. Shu jumped up in bed. He didn't understand who was there next to him. The protagonist looked carefully ahead. He realized that there was a man lying under the blanket in front of him. Shu lifted the blanket and looked very carefully at who was lying underneath it. The main character saw an unfamiliar young girl lying under the blanket on the bed. The guy abruptly covered the stranger with a blanket. He became very worried. Shu was very scared. He couldn't understand where the stranger on his bed came from. The girl came to her senses. She asked the guy, "Is it really morning already?" The stranger sat up in bed and rubbed her eyes. She asked the protagonist why he had woken up so early. Shu sat up in fear and realized that the unfamiliar girl knew him personally. The girl grabbed the frightened guy with her arms and shouted that she wanted to eat. Shu looked at the stranger and asked who she was. The girl approached the guy and said with displeasure that he forgot about her very quickly. The main character, trying to remain calm, told the girl to quickly go home and that they would have nothing. The stranger looked at the guy and asked, "Did he really mean everything that happened in reality?" Shu looked closely at the stranger and asked if she had any superpowers. The girl laughed. She told the main character that he was very innocent. Shu asked his interlocutor with displeasure who she was and what she was doing in his house. The stranger looked at the main character with a smile and said that her name was Wang Yihan. The main character told his interlocutor that she was a relative of her friend Vanica. At this time, the girlfriend knocked on the main character's room with her hand and shouted for him to get up. Van entered the room and, dissatisfied, noticed how the guy was sitting next to the girl. Van looked at her sister with fear and asked what she was doing here. Van pointed her finger at her sister and the main character in fear. Her voice trembled. Zhu explained to his girlfriend that he didn't even know her sister. Yahan greeted her sister with a smile. The main character was very unpleasantly surprised when he realized that there were two sisters next to him. Zhu sat at the table, and there was food there. He thought that the girls were not at all similar to each other. Yihan pointed at her friend and said that she was growing very well. The protagonist watched from the side. The protagonist asked Van if she was really sure that her sister was next to her. The girls didn't look alike at all. Zhu sat opposite his girlfriends. He asked Van why she said she was nowhere near her sister's level. Van pointed to the side and said that her sister is the leader of their clan. She is absolutely first class. Shu looked at Yihan with displeasure. The girl did not seem first class to him. Van explained to the protagonist that she and her sister belonged to the succubus clan. Her sister can change her appearance at will. The main character was surprised when he heard about succubi from his girlfriend. Initially, a succubus was a demon that came to a man in a dream to seduce him. Hypnotic ability is very rare, which is why succubus clans have become a target for everyone. The association gladly accepts anyone with the ability to hypnotize. The girl jumped up near the table. She told the protagonist that she wanted to improve her relationship with the landlord. Yihan extended her finger to her face and very carefully touched her lips with it. The girl swung her finger and blew a small kiss at the guy. Yihan jumped to her feet cheerfully. She said that she would do something fun with her sister. The Van clan is predominantly female, which is why they are called the succubus clan. For hundreds of years, women have used their abilities to serve various powers. Wang Yihan is the most prominent clan leader in the last 50 years. The protagonist looked at his girlfriend with concern. He didn't know if she had any physical limitations. Yu sat on a chair and looked at the girl with fear. She asked him why he had gone silent. The main character asked his interlocutor, how did she want him to react? Yihan told the guy with a smile that because of her sister's presence, he was deliberately hiding his feelings for her. The protagonist replied to his interlocutor that anyone who opened their eyes and saw a strange woman next to them would panic. He didn't like Yihan's large breasts. Yihan was very angry. She looked at the protagonist with hatred and didn't know what to say. Van was very unpleasantly surprised when she saw that her sister was angry. She wanted the main character to stop. The main character told the girls that his moped was broken. He needed to leave early today to fix it. He asked the girl to leave. Yihan was kneeling on the floor. She was unhappy because she had failed to seduce the protagonist. Van shouted to her sister in a frightened voice to calm down. Yihan possessed hypnotic skills. She could increase a man's human desire many times over. A pink glow appeared around the girl's hand. A pink magical bow and arrow appeared in the girl's hands. If such an arrow hits the guy, he will never be able to escape his love hallucinations. The main character didn't notice how a magic arrow was flying behind him. The pink arrow hit the guy in the back and pierced him from behind. Shu didn't have time to think about anything. Van looked at the main character with fear and thought that it was all over for him. The main character turned around and asked his interlocutor what she was doing. Suddenly, the guy found himself in some parallel reality. He didn't understand where he was. The guy found himself surrounded by a huge group of beautiful girls. One of them told him that she wouldn't let him go. The girl looked at the main character and said that he would stay here for the rest of his life. Van asked the guy in fear what she would do if he remained in her sister's hallucinations for a very long time. the protagonist might lose his human form. Shu sat down and looked at the jar near his feet. He was surprised that hypnosis could be developed to such a high level. This was the first time he had been subjected to such a powerful illusion. Yihan looked at the main character in surprise and thought that he was very strange. The protagonist didn't lose his composure. He extended his hand to the girl and gave a thumbs up. The main character cheerfully told his girlfriend that she was great and had done a good job. Yihan shouted at the guy in a displeased voice not to look down on her. Yihan extended her hand forward and demanded that the girls absorb the protagonist. The demonic girl stood there, glaring angrily at the protagonist. Yihan said that in her fantasy world, the willpower of each participant gradually erodes. The main character stood and watched as illusory girls approached him from all sides. Yihan looked sternly at the guy and said that he would stay here forever. The main character asked the girl, "Does she really want to break him?" The girls surrounded the main character and began to persistently pester him. Yu said very angrily and sternly that his willpower could not be broken. A bright glow appeared around the protagonist, and his body was covered in a protective cocoon. The protagonist stood in the center of a magical reality, with demonic girls flying around him. Yihan looked at the guy in surprise. She realized that she hadn't been able to break him. Shu glanced at the girl flying in front of him and said that he would forgive her if he managed to deliver the orders on time. The protagonist angrily warned Han about what would happen if he failed to deliver the orders on time. The girl got very angry when she heard the guy talk about delivery. The girl angrily rushed at the main character from above and shouted at him not to blame her for beating him up. Yihan was very surprised that the guy could use his abilities in her illusion. The girl screamed loudly. The main character grabbed her by the throat with his hand. Shu held the girl by the throat, and at that moment a huge red monster appeared from the side. The main character shouted at the girl in an angry voice so that she could guess. The main character held his girlfriend by the throat. Yihan angrily told the guy that no one but her could do that. The girl tried to free herself from the guy's grip. She was unhappy with him for using his powers to illusion her. The main character angrily asked the girl, "Does she really want to say that he is not a human?" The protagonist jumped back from the girl and threw her away from him. He told her that he knew how to dispel hypnosis. Shu answered the girl in a calm voice that he could only be hypnotized if he wanted to. Yihan was sitting on her knees. She told the guy that the association didn't know about his existence. Otherwise, he wouldn't be walking the streets calmly delivering orders. The girl stretched her arms out to the side and pink lightning appeared next to her. Yihan prepared to shoot the protagonist with a magic bow. She sternly told him that if the association found out about him, they would shut him down and experiment on him. The protagonist angrily asked the girl if she really wanted to use hypnosis in her illusion again. He threatened that she might fall into a double illusion and wouldn't be able to escape. The girl prepared to shoot a magic arrow at the guy. She told him that she wanted to test what she was capable of. The main character calmly answered his interlocutor that he would stand there in place. Yihan asked the guy in fear, "Why is he doing this?" The protagonist replied to the girl that he was giving her a chance to test what would happen with her double illusion. He was curious about what would happen at the next level. The girl launched a magic arrow at the protagonist. She shouted at him for looking down on other people. The arrow flew right towards the guy and crashed into a small barrier. Cracks appeared on the glass. The protective glass shattered into many pieces. There were no people visible around. Yihan lay unconscious on the floor of the room with her eyes closed. Van ran into the room and asked her sister in fear what had happened to her. Lin ran into the room and asked the girls in fear, "What are they doing in the morning?" She explained that the door hadn't been repaired and was letting in sound. Lin sat down and looked at the unconscious stranger on the floor. Wang explained to the girl that her sister was next to her. She suddenly lost consciousness. Van was scared because her sister fainted. She didn't know what to do. Lin took the girl's pulse and said that everything should pass. She needed to lie down for a bit. Lin asked the girl why her sister ended up in the main character's room. The girl is unhappy. She asked the main character, "Why did Yihan faint in his room?" Shu thought and became scared. He didn't know what to answer the girl now. Lin swung her leg and hit the guy. She demanded an immediate answer from him. The main character was lying unconscious on the floor. The girl said in fear that the guy had become really ill. Van explained to her interlocutor with excitement that the main character was inside her sister's illusion. Lin looked at the girls with the surname Wang with great excitement and realized that they were two sisters. Lin asked her interlocutor if her sister Yihan was the head of the Wang clan. Wang confirmed to her interlocutor in a sad voice that Yihan was her sister. Lin told the girl with excitement that the two of them should come to the association. Van asked her interlocutor in fear about joining the association. Lin sternly told the girl that her sister was not only the head of the clan, but also one of the deadly sins. Yihan is lust. Van couldn't believe her sister could join such a sinister organization. Lin explained to the girl that her intelligence department wanted to invite the two of them for a talk. After the conversation, they would be released. Wang looked at Yihan with worry and said that her sister was currently unconscious. Lin extended her hand forward and activated mind reading and surveillance mode. This mode allowed her to penetrate her opponent's subconscious and learn their secrets. Lin touched the unconscious girl's head with her fingers. The frightened Tench looked ahead. She couldn't understand how this could have happened. Van, frightened and cautious, asked her friend how she was feeling. Lin looked with concern at the unconscious girl on the floor and said that she could not see anything and everything was in darkness. The girl was in a second-level illusion. She lay unconscious in a dark room. Yihan opened her eyes and came to her senses. She saw that she was in bottomless darkness. The girl glanced around, searching for the main character. She remembered that she had pulled him along with her. Yihan suddenly hit her head. She didn't understand what was happening. The girl looked up in surprise and noticed a huge statue in front of her. Yihan looked at the huge stone monument above her in surprise. Above the girl's head, there was a huge stone monument in the form of the main character. Suddenly, the monument's eyes lit up. He looked angrily at the girl. The statue looked angrily at the girl with its bright, glowing red eyes. Yihan was very unpleasantly surprised. She didn't understand why the guy turned out to be the master of her illusion. The monument glared at the girl. She felt the statue's overwhelming energy suffocating her. The wooden monument raised its hand and pointed towards the finger. Yihan stood at its feet. The statue pointed its finger strictly to the side. The girl continued to stand below. The monument angrily asked the girl if she wanted to know who he was. Yihan was very scared and worried. She stared straight ahead. The girl's body was floating in the dimension. Bright windows surrounded her. The monument asked her if she wanted to know who he was. Yihan was very surprised. She did not understand what was in front of her. The girl saw various episodes from the life of the main character, how he died from a pistol and poisoning. Yihan saw the main character dressed as a knight. He was hit from behind by numerous arrows. The main character was standing near a tree in the evening. An apple fell on his head and he was struck by lightning. The main character was lying unconscious on the table near the computer screen. Yihan stared ahead silently. She carefully studied the protagonist's story. Sue told the girl from the side that he himself did not know who he really was. Yihan turned around and looked at the main character with great displeasure. Shu proudly told the girl that he knew that all this around him was himself. The protagonist dreamily told his interlocutor that he was in an endless cycle of reincarnations. He was dying and grieving inconsolably. Shu turned around and told the girl that he himself did not know how he controlled her illusion. The girl closed her eyes in fear and told the guy that she hadn't seen anything at all. Yihan worried that she would lose to the main character. He has a very strange power. The main character asked his interlocutor about her desire to kill him. The girl closed her eyes in fear. She said she had no chance of winning in this situation. The protagonist stood with his back to the statue. He was surprised that his monument was in the girl's second-level illusion. Yihan shouted at the guy in a dissatisfied voice that she was bored and wanted to go home. The girl thought angrily that she would sell the main character to the association after they got out of here. Yu explained to his interlocutor that she would not remember anything after they got out of here. A bright pink glow appeared near the girl's hand. She told the guy that it could happen that they would lose their minds in this place. The girl in the pink glow suddenly jumped up and ran forward. She told the guy that she would pretend the illusion was complete and they could get out at any time. Yihan swung her hand and hit the empty space with all her might. The girl waved her hand and didn't understand why all this wasn't working. Yu stood next to the girl behind her and asked if she needed his help. Yihan bowed to the ground and rested her hands on the floor. She swung her hand with a pink glow. The girl swung her hand with all her might with a pink glow. Yihan sat down on the ground, exhausted. She thought that all this happened because of what the guy said at the very beginning. The main character swung his leg sharply and prepared to strike. Sue kicked with all his might and broke the huge glass. Van, through the broken glass, frighteningly shook her sister and screamed for her to wake up. The protagonist stood next to Yihan. They both silently looked through the broken glass. Shu looked ahead happily and reminded the girl that he had said that he would return. The protagonist suddenly opened his eyes and came to his senses. He stared piercingly ahead. Sue touched the girl with his hand and looked at her with displeasure and asked, "Did she really do this?" Lin told the guy with displeasure that she had been trying to get through to him for half a day, and it was all in vain. Shu held his nose with his hands. He told the girls with displeasure that he would demand compensation. Lin explained to the guy with displeasure that thanks to her, he was able to escape the illusion. Van looked at the main character very slyly and winked at him. Van looked at her little sister and asked how she was feeling. Yihan weakly replied to her sister that she was feeling dizzy. Yihan couldn't remember anything. She didn't know what happened after they found themselves on the second level of the illusion. Lin came up and told the girl in a stern voice that she should follow her to the association. Van asked her interlocutor in a dissatisfied voice why she should follow her to the association. Lin told the girl that she suspected she was connected to a criminal organization. She demanded Yihan's cooperation until the circumstances were clarified. Yihan was very surprised when she heard the words about clarifying the circumstances. Lin became worried. She looked at the girl and decided not to say anything more to her. Lin promised her interlocutor that they would continue the conversation after she returned from the association. Wang turned away and told her interlocutor that she would wait for her return. Van slyly told the girl that they both had abilities related to mind reading. She asked that Ding not even try to find out all her secrets. Lin became worried. She didn't understand how the interlocutor knew what abilities she had. Yihan approached her sister and told her that they needed to leave now. Van answered her sister in a dissatisfied voice that she did not want to go with her. Yihan looked at her sister with displeasure and said that she wanted to disobey her. Van looked at Van with a frightened voice and answered her that she would never dare to disobey her. Yihan shouted at her sister in a dissatisfied voice not to stand there, but to follow her. The main character ran up to the girls and shouted in fear for them to wait. Yihan turned to the guy with displeasure and asked, "What else does he want?" The protagonist replied that he would keep a close eye on her. The guy reminded his interlocutor that her sister hadn't paid him the rent. Yihan replied to the guy that her sister's affairs had nothing to do with her. She only came here to bring Wang home. The guest bowed to the protagonist and said that she would first sort out her family affairs and then return here. The main character remained silent and did not answer the girl. He looked after her. Shu watched very carefully as both girls walked out the door. Lin came up to the protagonist and told him that the sisters were acting strange. Their behavior didn't seem like sisterly. The main character suddenly screamed very loudly. The tench next to him was very scared. Shu asked his friend in a frightened voice, "What time is it now?" Lin glanced at the clock on the wall and told the guy that it was 9:30. The main character fell to the ground. He said in a tragic voice that he wouldn't have time to fix the moped. The main character told the girl in a dissatisfied voice that he was getting into trouble after he met her. There was a group of people standing on the street near the house. The Van sisters got ready to go out. A group of security guards in suits and dark glasses stood near the exit and waited for the girls. Yihan told her sister to follow her. They followed to a black car near the entrance. The security guards in suits and glasses greeted the lady in unison. Van turned around with displeasure. She didn't understand why there were so many guards around. Yihan was sitting in the back seat of the car. She shouted at her sister to get in with her quickly. The protagonist went out onto the balcony. He noticed a black car drive away from the building. The guy stood on the balcony and carefully watched what was happening on the street. Several security guards were still on the sidewalk. The girl came up behind the guy and put her hands on his shoulder. She told him with surprise that Yihan turned out to be the second lady of the Wang family. Lin looked at the guy and said that he was now working for the association. He could now stop delivering orders. Yu stood and silently looked ahead. The girl from the side poked him with her finger. The main character shouted loudly that he no longer had to work in delivery. The girl was sitting at home near the mirror. The maid was combing her hair. Van answered her elderly nanny in a frightened voice that she did not want to get married. The maid adjusted the girl's hair and said that a good groom had been found for her. She should not refuse. Van was dissatisfied. She didn't know what to answer the maid to her words. The nanny continued to straighten the girl's hair with her comb. The maid hugged the sad girl and said that all this was her duty. A man approached from the side. He asked the lady if she was ready. Van stood hugging the maid. Van looked away and said in a sad voice that the clan leader and the guests had already arrived. The man and the girl headed for the exit. The maid remained in the room. The servant took pity on the girl in a frightened voice. Van was very surprised when she heard this. The man looked at the girl and said that the wedding date had already been set. It would all take place at the end of the month. The girl asked the man with displeasure, "Will it really all happen so quickly?" The servant told the girl that the wedding date would not be changed unless there were any surprises. Van stepped forward and abruptly entered the next room. Her sister was sitting there. Yihan sat in a chair with an apple in her hand. A young man sat on the chair next to her. The girl with the apple slyly said that it was always possible that something unexpected would happen. The guy with glasses clapped his hands and said that it was all good. The guest approached the girl and examined her carefully from all sides. The guy in glasses carefully studied his future bride. The girl stood silently. The stranger happily said that Wang would be able to bear him healthy children. Yihan joyfully shouted to the boy that the Ouyang family still believed in such things. A frightened Van grabbed the edges of her clothes. She stared ahead with a piercing gaze. The guy said with a smile that the Ouyang family now needs to think about future generations. They only have one heir. Yihan jumped out of her seat. The groom happily told the girl that he was expecting the wedding at the end of the month. Yihan extended her hand to the guy and wished him good cooperation with a smile. The satisfied future groom extended his hand to the girl and shook it in return. Van told her sister in a frightened voice that she wanted to step away and rest. Yihan calmly answered her sister that she could leave. Wang walked away and headed for the door. Yihan explained to the guy that her sister had been unsociable since childhood. He shouldn't pay attention to it. Yihan slyly told the future groom that after the wedding she would discuss the terms of their family's cooperation with him. The young man replied that his master was looking forward to it. Van thought sadly that since childhood no one had ever cared about her feelings. The girl sat by a small pond, looking sadly into it. She thought that she had always been nothing but a tool in the hands of the Wang family. She had no right even to complain. The silent girl sat and looked into the water very sadly with tears. Van put her hands to her face. She felt tears coming to her eyes. Shu came up behind the girl and addressed her. He told her in a calm voice that her makeup was running down her face. A very sad Van touched her face with her hand in fear. The girl turned around and asked the main character, "Where did he come from here?" Chu pointed to the side and explained to his interlocutor that he had entered through the gate. His girlfriend was surprised that the guy hadn't been detained at the entrance. The protagonist explained to his interlocutor that he had identified himself as a courier and was let in. The girl was very surprised when she heard such words from the main character. The girl in the estate building shouted at the guy that he couldn't stay there. Van ran away and pulled her friend by the hand. She shouted that if his sister found out about his presence, he would be in great trouble. The girl told her friend that she would walk him to the back gate. She asked him not to come to her again and not to look for her. Shu asked his friend on the go why she was crying. The girl turned to the main character and wanted to tell him the reason for her tears. The girl and her friend ran to the corner of the building. They decided that someone was there. The girl and the guy stopped. They realized there was someone next to them. A man slowly stepped out from around the corner of the building. It was a servant. The servant looked at the girl and asked who was standing next to her now. The girl asked Uncle Shu in fear why he was here. The man answered the lady that he was going to water the flowers in the garden. The man looked closely and noticed how the girl was holding the main character's hand. Shu asked the lady sternly, "Does she really not want to marry because of her friend?" Van stood and held the protagonist's hand. The man pointed his finger sternly at them. Suddenly, the girl pulled her hand away from the guy and told the servant that she had nothing to do with him. The man looked at the main character and said thoughtfully that this guy was a courier. Suddenly, the servant had a sudden idea and he joyfully shouted that he understood. Van behind him was very scared. Sue told in a tragic voice the story of unhappy love between a rich girl and an ordinary courier. Van answered her uncle in a dissatisfied voice that everything had happened completely wrong. The main character grabbed his girlfriend by the hand and answered the man that everything was exactly like that. Shu looked at the man and asked him in a tragic voice to help the two lovers. Shu put his hand on his face in fear. He didn't know what to answer the guy and the girl. The man looked at the young people with displeasure and said that he did not want to help them. Both hands of the servant lit up with fire. He said that if someone could so easily help the poor lovers, it wouldn't be a good tragic story. Van shouted in a disgruntled voice to the servant that the guy was her landlord. There was nothing else connecting them. Shu, with burning hands, told the lady in a stern voice that he wanted to help her understand the guy's true feelings. The protagonist told the man that he was just an ordinary courier, and they didn't need to fight. The servant sternly told the boy that an ordinary courier wouldn't have come here to visit. The boy replied that he had used a trick to get in, but he only wanted to see Vanya. The man swung and launched a huge beam of fire at the main character. A bright flash appeared in front of the main character. He managed to dodge it. The man was scared. He realized that the main character had disappeared very quickly. The guy suddenly rushed at the man from behind and twisted his arms behind his back. The servant was lying on the ground. He couldn't understand when the guy managed to attack him from behind. The man's hands behind him began to glow with a bright fire. He decided to try to get out. The servant jumped to his feet, and behind him there was a bright, fiery explosion. The main character appeared from the side. He managed to dodge the fiery explosion. The guy looked closely at the servant and asked him to listen to him. The main character explained to the man that the girl was crying because in their family it was not customary to listen and care for each other. The man asked the boy what kind of family he was from. The protagonist replied that there was only one of him in the whole world. The main character answered the man in a dissatisfied voice that he was just an ordinary courier. The servant decided not to give up. He prepared to attack the guy with a new spell. The servant used a skill called Raging Flame against the protagonist. There was fire near his hands. The man realized that his opponent was of a very high level. He hadn't used such techniques against anyone for a long time. The protagonist calmly told his opponent not to use such techniques against him. He didn't want to fight him. The man looked at the guy and was surprised to realize that he had been able to predict his actions. The protagonist turned around and answered the servant that he could hear his thoughts, but he himself was not a psychic. The man got angry. He couldn't believe that the guy could hear thoughts but wasn't a psychic. Suddenly, the servant felt something behind him. He was very surprised. The servant turned sharply and looked at his mistress with excitement. The girl extended her hand to the servant and asked for forgiveness. The man fell unconscious to the ground. The main character looked at everything that was happening and thought that this was all an unexpected turn of events. The girl pulled the unconscious man with all her strength. She shouted to the protagonist that she had used hypnosis to make the servant faint. The guy could use this opportunity to leave their house through the back gate. The girlfriend held the servant's body in her hands. She told the guy to go straight ahead and find the exit. Shu looked at his girlfriend and asked if she would go with him. The girl threw the man's body into the bushes. She turned to the protagonist. Van answered the guy in a dissatisfied voice that she was getting married next month. The main character replied to the girl that he would not return her rent money. The girl sadly sprinkled green flowers on the man's body. She told the protagonist that the money did not need to be returned. She broke the contract herself. Van burst into tears. The protagonist called his girlfriend to come with him. The girl told the guy that he wasn't obligated to help her. The main character looked at the girl for a long time. He didn't say anything to her. Shu turned around and walked away. He told the girl that he would leave. A tench ran up from the side. It shouted at the protagonist to stop. The tench landed on the ground after jumping. She turned angrily towards the protagonist. The girlfriend grabbed the guy by the clothes and asked, "Why did he just decide to up and leave?" Lin asked the protagonist, "Why did he spend half a day looking for her and drag her here?" The protagonist communicated with the girl telepathically. He wanted her to shut up. Lin threatened the guy that she would report him to the association. The girl threatened the guy that the association would cut him into pieces. Van was very surprised when she realized that the guy and the girl came to this place because of her. The main character continued to quarrel angrily with his girlfriend. Shu put his hand on his head and thought that in this life he would die because of this girl. The protagonist sat down on the ground. He said that if Van didn't want to get married, she could tell him so. The girlfriend was deep in thought. She didn't know what to answer the main character. The main character sternly reminded the girl that he could help her if she told him about it. Van looked at the guy with a sad expression. She didn't know if she could trust him. The girl screamed piercingly that she didn't want to get married and didn't want to be someone's thing. Van looked at the main character with fear and asked him to take her away from here. Shu covered the girl's face with his hand and told her not to scream. The protagonist felt as if he and his girlfriend were staging a coup. He told the girl that she scared him to death. Van responded to the guy that her reaction was very emotional. Lin approached and slyly told the girl that if Van refused to rent an apartment with them, then she herself would not live with the main character. Lin extended her friend's hand. Van silently looked at the girl's hand. Van placed her palm on her friend's palm and silently thanked her. Van asked her friends, what should she do now? The protagonist answered the girl with a smile that he didn't know. Lin looked slyly at the guy and asked if he really hadn't thought of a plan before coming here. The protagonist turned away and explained that he simply wanted to make sure the bathtubs were safe. The girl was renting his apartment. Lin shouted angrily at the guy from the side. The protagonist glanced at the girl and told her to follow him. If Yihan was looking for her, she would meet him first. Van sadly asked the guy what would happen to her family. The protagonist reminded the girl that her family members forced her to do things she didn't want to do. Van looked ahead in fear. She thought about her family members. Lin hugged her friend and said that they would solve problems as they came up. The protagonist and her friends stepped aside. Lin told her friends that they could go to a cafe on Vostoknaya Street. She wanted to eat something tasty. The servant in the pile of green leaves suddenly came to his senses and stretched out his hand. The man put his hand to his head. He felt very sad, and tears appeared in his eyes. The servant reached into his pocket and took out a small handkerchief to wipe his face. The man thought sadly to himself that time was flying by, and his mistress had finally made some friends. A servant entered the house and informed the lady that their subordinates had shown incompetence and were unable to stop the lady's second daughter. Van ran away with her friends. Yihan sat at the table. She told the man that she was amazed at his incompetence. The man asked the girl for forgiveness in a very frightened voice. Yihan glanced at the servant and said that she was joking and that he had nothing to worry about. The servant promised in an excited voice to return the young lady to Ike. The girl, sitting at the table, told the man that there was no need to worry and that they still had plenty of time. The man asked the lady, will she really allow her sister to live outside the house? Yihan reached out to the food on the table. She told the man that she wanted to see if her sister really wanted this or if it was just talk. The girl took a bite of her apple and said that Van had seemed detached since childhood. She simply went with the flow. Yihan remembered standing next to the protagonist in a parallel reality. She decided that Shu really was a strange guy. The girl turned around and looked at the servant. She told him that he could go. The servant obediently answered his mistress that he would do everything as she ordered. The man walked up to the door and opened it to leave the room. The girl silently took a banana from the table in her hand. She stared piercingly ahead. Yihan threw a banana up in the air for the guy who approached her on the balcony. The fat stranger ate the banana that the lady had given him with great appetite. The lady looked at the guy Gulu and told him in a dissatisfied voice that there had been no news from him for a long time. Gulu stood on the balcony and looked down from above at the girl below in the room. Suddenly, a fat fighter jumped from the balcony into the ladies' room. Gu was at the 5th level and possessed the ability of gluttony. The fighter grabbed an apple and bit off half of it. He told the girl that Lord Chanshun had asked him to find out why she was absent from the last meeting. Yihan told her partner that if Qianyu needed anything from her, he could write to her. Gu sat down on a chair. He glanced wryly at the girl and told her that Mr. Qian preferred traditional methods of communication, although he knew how to use social media. The fighter was surprised that the succubus family was afraid of society. The dissatisfied Yihan sternly demanded that the fighter stop eating. Gu looked at the girl crookedly with burning eyes and asked, does she really think he's fat? Yihan told the guy in a disgruntled voice that she didn't like it when someone talked with their mouth full. Gu explained to his interlocutor that if he didn't eat, he would be very angry. When he was angry, he would do bad things. The lady on the chair looked at the fighter and asked what else he wanted to say. Gu informed the girl that Mr. Qian was interested in the well-being of the marriage of the Wang and Ouyang families. The hostess calmly replied to the fighter that the negotiations had been successful. Gu looked sternly at the girl and said that the Ouyang family is highly respected. Yihan must make sure that everything goes well. The hostess told the guy that if he had nothing else to say, he could go. She asked that the fighter warn her in advance about his visit. The fat man stood up from his chair and prepared to leave. He turned around and looked at the table with food. Gu extended his finger to the side and pointed it at the fruit dish. He wanted to take it for himself. The girl told the fighter that he could take the food. Gu happily reached out his hands to the fruit. Yihan stood up from her seat and asked the guy if he was afraid that someone would see him. Gu answered that no one would see him. The fighter began to eat the apple with gusto. He said that someone might actually notice him. Gu angrily told the girl that he would make such a person disappear. The guy stood at the door. He waved his hand to the girl and shouted that Mr. Qian was expecting good news from her. Yihan fell onto the table and grabbed her head with her hands. She screamed that she was in trouble. The main character was at home in his apartment with his girlfriends. Van sat on the sofa, frightened. She told Lin that she didn't understand anything. Lin sternly asked her interlocutor, does she really know nothing about her family affairs? Van was the second young lady in the family. Van cowered on the sofa in fear. She said that in her family she was simply an outcast. The main character sat on the sofa and silently looked at the girls from his side. Shu reached out to the TV remote control and wanted to turn it on. The girlfriend snatched the remote from the protagonist's hands and yelled at him to be serious. They had to work. The main character in a calm voice threatened his interlocutor about what she might get from him. Lin grabbed her head with her hands. She shouted that the association could lose the thread that leads to the criminal organization. The protagonist stood up. He told the girl in a stern voice that she wasn't as kind as she pretended to be. She had a reason for coming to Ike's aid. Before interrogating Ike, Lin studied detailed information about the Wang family. She found out that Ike was telling the truth. Lin, sitting on the sofa, said that even if she dealt with the succubus, she would still have little money. In the Wang family, only the eldest child was always honored. The other family members were raised as servants. The girl on the couch told her friends that she needed to go to the association for an introductory briefing. She would be there for 2 days. Van told her friend that she wanted to join the association. She'd dreamed of it since childhood, but her level was low. Lin replied to her interlocutor that the association has always opened the door to those with hypnotic abilities. Van, in a modest voice, wanted to tell her partners what her sister had said. Lin told the girl that if she wanted to get rid of her family's influence, she should speak freely about her desires and feelings. Lin excitedly recounted that the association had approached the Wang family with proposals for cooperation. But all such proposals had been rejected. Van was very surprised when she heard such words from her friend. She remembered that her sister had told her disapprovingly that she only had a third level of abilities. No one would take her seriously. Yihan was playing a computer game. She told her sister to just stay home and do her chores. Lin sternly demanded that her interlocutor be more self-confident. Lin reminded her interlocutor that she had managed to deal with the manager of her building. Van began to remember. Frightened, Van looked at her hands in fear. She couldn't believe that she had actually done it. Ike remembered that since childhood, she had been in her and her sister's shadow. Yi Han was the favorite daughter in the family. Van felt very sad. She wanted to tell her friends something about herself. The main character put his hand on his girlfriend's shoulder and said that sometimes, the stronger the ability, the more trouble there is. Lin looked at the girl with a searching gaze. She thought for a long time. A friend asked Ike with a smile if she really wanted to join the association. Van looked at her friend with excitement and shouted that she wanted to be a member of the association. Lin slyly replied to her interlocutor that she had one way. The protagonist, standing behind her, said with displeasure that if the girl smiled, it meant she was up to no good. Van excitedly shouted to her friends that she wanted to try and it didn't matter how. Lin told his interlocutor the details of the association's entrance exams. After passing all the tests, Wang could be accepted as a full-time employee. Ike excitedly asked what other tests they were talking about. Lin explained to her interlocutor that no one in the outside world knew about this test. She asked if she wanted to try it. Van excitedly shouted to the girl that if she had even the slightest chance, she should take advantage of it. Lin and her companion approached a large building. Wang was very surprised. Lin greeted the girl with a smile at the association's headquarters. Ike stood next to her friends. She looked around in surprise and said that there were tall buildings around. Lin told the girl that the introductory training lasts 3 days. Then, she'll have to live at the association's headquarters for 3 days. First, she'll go with the protagonist for the introductory training. Van will be waiting for them in her office. Ike looked happily at the girl and said that she agreed. Lin asked her friend if he remembered her words. Xu answered his interlocutor that he remembered everything. The main character stood near the entrance to the building with his 2 girlfriends. Lin warned the boy that if he worked for the association, he could only use one ability. Otherwise, he would be thoroughly studied and experimented on. The protagonist entered the building through the open doors. Suddenly, a loud explosion was heard. 2 scientists stood terrified in the center of the room. One man said the meter had jumped very high. The other worker couldn't understand why the meter had exploded. The protagonist stood with his girlfriend. Lin looked ahead in surprise, not understanding what was happening. Bright and powerful explosions were heard around the girls. CCTV cameras exploded. Lin pointed her finger at the main character with displeasure and said telepathically that all this happened because of him. The girlfriend angrily demanded that the guy hide his abilities. Xu answered the girl telepathically that the meter turned out to be very fragile. Lin glanced sideways at the protagonist and explained to him mentally that the malfunction would soon be discovered. As a result, they would attract unwanted attention. Xu thought discontentedly to himself that he would need to use special gadgets. The main character put his hand into his pocket to get something for himself. The guy stuck 2 small metal arrows into his head. He asked the girl if he looked like her. Lin looked at the main character and asked with surprise, "What is this?" The guy told the girl that in one of the anime he saw that you can hide your abilities if you use antennas. The main character turned his back to the surprised girl and began to further change his appearance. The main character wore green glasses and had a pink haircut. He asked the girl if they looked more alike that way. The angry tench swung with all its might and hit the protagonist on the head. The protagonist was with a girl in the building. He told her in a disgruntled voice that she hadn't warned him that the ability tester could be destroyed if he was near it. Xu had deliberately taken the time to make an ability suppressor. The protagonist told the girl that he brought the device here specifically, just in case. But he himself isn't very good at creating mind control tools. The guy told the girl in a dissatisfied voice that the silencer could be used for a maximum of 5 minutes. Lin grabbed the guy by the clothes with her hand and sternly asked why he didn't say this before. The girlfriend pulled the surprised protagonist aside and said that he would go with her. Van saw her friends running away and shouted for them to wait for her. The main character and his girlfriend took the elevator up the building. Lin pulled him along the corridor. She shouted at the workers to let her through. She had important business. The association employees looked on in amazement. Yu suddenly ran into a little boy while running at full speed. The child looked at the girl with surprise and attention and called her by name. Lin ran down the corridor and shouted in a dissatisfied voice that she couldn't push through. The child looked at the guy in surprise and did not understand what kind of person he was. The girlfriend pulled the protagonist into a separate room with white furniture. She approached the door. Lin opened the door to the room and threw the main character inside with all her might. The girl entered the room and closed the door behind her. She said in an exhausted voice that all of this was dangerous. Van was sitting on the floor. She asked her friend why she ran away so suddenly. Lin stood near the wall. She glanced at the protagonist and told the girl that her landlord was a monster. Van looked at her interlocutor with displeasure and said that she did not understand what kind of monster she was talking about. Lin was surprised to hear that the main character was so powerful that his ability counter malfunctioned and exploded. Van was very surprised when she heard about the meter explosion. She excitedly asked what kind of level the guy had. Shu, standing with his back to the girls, said that he hadn't even bothered to test his own ability level. Wang was surprised to hear that the guy hadn't measured his own. Van told the protagonist that people's ability levels are fixed after they finish kindergarten. Yu slyly replied to his girlfriend that he only went to kindergarten for a year, and then he was kicked out. The guy asked his girlfriend to keep his abilities a secret. He didn't want other people to know about them. Ike looked at the main character with concern and promised that she would not tell anything. The girl pointed her finger at the horns on the guy's head and asked him to show her this antenna. Shu broke off one antenna from his head and told the girl that she could take a look if she wanted. Lin was lying on the floor. She was talking to herself and said that she wanted to earn money and pay off her debts. The protagonist told the girl that she was talking very loudly to herself. Van held a small metal arrow in her hands. She told the protagonist that he really was a genius. The girl showed the antenna to the main character and told him that she would help him make a similar ability jammer. Van told her friends in detail about scientific research showing that the human body can produce supernatural abilities. It was discovered that such abilities are caused by DNA mutations. The girl happily told her friends that a special snake can generate electricity of varying levels. People can use their brains to perform calculations and activate supernatural powers. Van told her friends that the protagonist's line of thinking was entirely correct. Some surgeries on the cerebral cortex can indeed suppress or enhance abilities. Lin told her friend in a joyful voice that her family didn't even know how smart she was. Van was surprised when she heard such words from her friend. She couldn't believe it was true. The girl was holding a small ornament in her hands. She asked Lin, "Where's the antenna?" Van handed her friend a small pendant. She said she could turn this bracelet into an ability suppressor. Shu asked the girl with interest, "Does she really understand technology?" The girl held a small bracelet in her hands. She explained that the bracelet could be tuned to a specific frequency in the protagonist's brain. As a result, the decoration would inhibit his abilities. Van explained that such a device could only be used for 3 days at most. Lin smiled very happily at her friend and said that 3 days would be quite enough. Shu excitedly suggested to the girl that she enhance her own abilities. Wang replied that a doctor cannot perform surgery on himself. The girl explained to her friends that people with hypnotic abilities are very rarely able to control themselves. The protagonist replied to his girlfriend that it was all very annoying. The results of the study were recently published. Many criminals have tried to escape using such a suppressor. Lin sadly replied to her friends that these were all rumors. There were no real actions yet. The guy said to the girl with displeasure that others had already done everything possible. Among those who tried, there were definitely crazy people. Sue told his friends that these were all equivalent modifications to the human body. People with level 3 abilities could level up by improving their brain's processing power. Lin explained to the guy that the intelligence department hadn't discovered any relevant cases yet, but after the guy's words, she would raise the issue with intelligence. Lin told Wang that the girl could help the protagonist make a silencer. He couldn't delay registering for the introductory training. The girl was inside the room. She approached the main character. Van handed the guy a small souvenir on a pendant. She told him with a smile that the device was ready. The girl handed the finished device in the form of a decoration into the protagonist's hand. Shu hung the jewelry on his hand. He asked his girlfriend if she wanted to measure her own level first. Lin shouted to the protagonist from the side that she had already done it. She was holding a small device in her hands. Lin said her device was a little unstable. The monitor showed Van was on level 4. Van told her friends with fear that she herself still wasn't very good at controlling the frequency. Lin looked happily at her friend and said that Van had already helped them with a lot of things. Lin slyly thought that she no longer needed to worry about debts. Shu mentally told her friend not to show her greedy nature. The girl angrily yelled at the guy for prying into someone else's thoughts on his own. Zhu replied that he hadn't pried into anyone's thoughts. Lin looked at the guy and said that she would take him to the introductory training office. Lin prepared to go with the protagonist. She told Ike to wait for her in the office. Van waved goodbye to the main character and wished him good luck. Shu turned around and looked at his girlfriend. She seemed very defenseless to him. The protagonist and the girl were standing near the office. Lin told the guy that the introductory training office was located here. The protagonist looked ahead in surprise. He saw many different people standing near the office. There were many candidates near the registration points. At this time, window number 1 temporarily closed its doors. In the hallway, Mrs. Wang was asked to move to window number 8. The protagonist asked the girl, "Isn't this an ordinary office?" Lin asked the guy what he was thinking about. Shu answered the girl that he wasn't thinking about anything. The main character put his hand on his head and said discontentedly that he had watched a lot of TV series. The girl pointed to the 5th window for the main character and told him to go there to join the queue. Lin held a small document in her hands. She demanded that the guy behave naturally. Shu turned to her with interest. The protagonist stood in a crowd of people. He thought to himself about high magic. Shu looked at the man in front of him in the crowd. He remembered that this building used to be a bank building. The applicant handed the document out the window. The office worker asked him, "Is this a questionnaire?" An employee told the applicant through the glass that his grades were more suited to the combat department. He asked if the guy really wanted to join the intelligence department. The candidate in the green cloak sternly shouted at the man that he wanted to go on reconnaissance. The employee stamped the applicant's document. He told him to go to the 13th floor to participate in the training. The guy with the direction went off to the side. The main character approached the window. A man told the applicant through the glass that Lin's boss had recommended him. He asked the main character why he didn't want to work full-time. Shu replied to his partner through the glass that he was only willing to work part-time. The man carefully studied the protagonist's documents. Shu sat and waited patiently. The worker put a stamp on the protagonist's document and told Shu to go to the 13th floor. The main character answered the man that he understood to himself. He thought that the worker was staring at him very much. A girl appeared from the side and waved her hand at the main character. Shu walked towards her. The girlfriend asked the protagonist what they were asking him about. Shu replied that the employee had looked at his application and told him about the job. Sua told the girl that he could indeed work here. Lin responded to the guy with suspicion that perhaps he was not answering as she had instructed him. The protagonist told the girl that he had told the worker that he would be working part-time. Lin asked her friend if he had been asked about anything else. The main character confidently nodded his head and answered the girl that he was not asked anything else. Lin told the boy with a smile that all the workers in the logistics operations department seemed insightful. She added that Shu could go to training. The main character asked his interlocutor how the training would proceed. Lin looked at the guy and said that training is not an indicator, so he should remain calm. The girl told the guy that there would be 2 tests for him. The first test would be very interesting. The next would be boring combat trials. Sua told his interlocutor that listening to the ruler's words is the same as listening to one's own words. The girl, surprised, told the protagonist that he himself could not cope with the tests and was a unique case. The protagonist's girlfriend told him she wanted to check on Ike. He could take the elevator to the right floor. Lin waved goodbye to the main character and said that they would see each other in 3 days. Shu watched the girl leave. He told himself that they had indeed lost their way. The protagonist heard someone behind him demanding that he not block the door. Someone approached him. Shu felt that someone huge was standing behind him. He decided to turn around slowly. The main character turned around and said with surprise that the Minotaur was standing in front of him. A tall guy with horns asked the main character with displeasure, "Didn't he really hear what was said to him?" Shu pointed his hand to the side and told the guy to pass by him. The protagonist looked at the Minotaur's back. He thought to himself that there was a lot to see in this place. Yu stood near the elevator door. He couldn't believe that the Minotaur had real horns. The main character pressed the elevator button and prepared to enter the cabin. Shu looked into the elevator and saw that there were many different passengers there. Shu entered the elevator cabin. One of the strangers with a mirror asked someone to press the button for the 13th floor. The main character walked up to the wall and pressed the right button in the cabin. The system informed passengers that they had arrived at the correct floor, and the doors were supposed to open. The main character, along with the rest of his companions, exited the elevator cabin into the corridor. Shu walked confidently down the corridor of the 13th floor. Behind him was a stranger in a suit with a telephone. The protagonist glanced to the side and called his companion Mr. Perfect. The main character approached office number 1302. He stood at the door. The stranger in the suit at the side told the guy that they would be in the same group. The blonde-haired guy looked at the main character and greeted him. The stranger introduced himself and said that his name was Edward de Chaudemat. Edward extended his hand to the protagonist in greeting. He was a level 4 swordsman and wielded an elegant rapier. The main character extended his hand to his new acquaintance and told him his name. Edward extended his hand to open the door. He told the protagonist that they would now be in the same group and could help each other. The protagonist told his new friend that this was all true. They opened the door to the room. The room was filled with people with superpowers. Yuan-jae was a level 5 spirit and had a thunder belt. The frightened twins, named Chunhua and Chuntian, were level 4 and mastered Chinese martial arts. A guy named Wan Tong was a level 5 spirit and a computer genius. The guests in the room turned around and greeted the main character together. Edward waved to his new colleagues, saying he looked forward to their assistance in the future. The guy waved his hand at his new acquaintances with a smile and said that they could call him whatever they wanted. Win told the protagonist to take the training schedule from the table. Shu thanked him. The protagonist reached out to the table and prepared to take a stack of documents. Shu looked at the documents and carefully studied his new schedule. The protagonist was surprised. He realized that the schedule would be very busy for him. The document detailed the protagonist's daily schedule, including various training sessions and an analysis of the basic values of socialism. The protagonist remembered his friend's words. She told him that the first part of the training would be very interesting. Shu extended his hand and put the documents on the table. The guy thought about it. The main character was thinking hard. He didn't understand what to do next. Yan smiled and told the protagonist that he hadn't said anything about himself yet. Shu extended his hand to his partner and said that he used to work as a courier. Yan shook the protagonist's hand and said that he was a student, but left on his own. The main character realized that his partner wanted to find common ground with him and get closer to him. A woman wearing glasses, Jin, entered the room. She told the participants that today they would have an introductory lesson before the training began. The woman looked closely at the main character and realized that he was now here too. Shu looked at the worker and remembered that she had come to his house. Jin was the secretary of the head of the cleansing department. The girl told the applicants to first receive some materials. They should fully familiarize themselves with the literature within the next month. Jin clapped her hands and told the worker to bring in the books. An employee wheeled a cart full of books into the room. The woman told the participants they would study for 3 days. Ultimately, they would only be able to study a short version of the manual. The books would contain the full manual. Edward and the two twins looked at the pile of books in front of them with excitement. Vanya looked at the books with a smile and said that it would be easy for him. Participants stepped up to the tables. Yuan said that everything was clear to him. Jin informed the members that their group has full-time and part-time employees, but overall they all work for the association and the community. The woman informed the applicants that after joining the association, they would no longer be birthright citizens. The protagonist sat and carefully read the document. The boy looked closely at the schedule. He remembered that Lin had told him that they wouldn't have a grading system. The test participants sat at their desks. A woman explained the contents of the 30th chapter of the guided learning textbook to the students. Chin told the soldiers that they cannot go to the toilet in an inappropriate place. The offender's weapon will be confiscated. The protagonist thought to himself with displeasure that he had never heard of exams being held in this room before. Shu decided to himself that his death ability reminded him of this. The woman told the students that there are 5 hero headquarters around the world. Hoya told the students that the hero's headquarters, which is located in their city, is the main headquarters in Asia. The protagonist sat at his desk with Yuan, listening attentively. The woman informed the students that every 5 years he organizes international friendly competitions. All of this is an excellent opportunity to demonstrate strength. Qian explained to the boys that the headquarters that wins the competition will have the right to lead the 5 largest headquarters in the world for 5 years. The woman looked slyly at the students and said that she no longer had to explain anything to them. The test participants looked closely at the woman. Qin told them that they would be able to represent their country with dignity at the competition. Yu sat at the table, focused and prepared to solve the problems. He told himself that he couldn't refuse to participate. The protagonist held a document in his hands and showed it to the girl. He told her that they would have a final exam and he could not participate in it. Lin looked closely at the document. She was surprised that they decided to add a new exam this year. Akshu pointed to the document. He reminded the girl that she was the head of the department and should have known about such changes. Chiwai told the guy with a smile that she was very tired of running away from the creditor. In the end, she entrusted all her affairs to her secretary. She herself could not participate in the training. The girl bowed to the guy and said she had never heard anything about secretary's exams before. Shu asked his interlocutor, didn't she really undergo training before joining the association? Lin slyly told the guy that she was level 5 and had the ability to read minds. Therefore, she hadn't undergone training. The main character asked his girlfriend with displeasure, when will she stop making excuses with something else? Yu stood near the door and put his hand on the handle. He told the girl that he could not take part in the final exam. Lin excitedly called the protagonist a money tree and rushed forward to stop him. Shu angrily shouted at the girl to let him go. He fought her off. The girl angrily explained to the guy that if he left, it would mean that he refused to participate in the exam. The main character was very surprised when he heard such words from the girl. The girl excitedly told the protagonist that every candidate must undergo training upon joining the association. Dismissal is only possible by special decision. There are no other grounds. Lin told the guy in a disgruntled voice that if he left, she would seem to be the first from the end to refuse the exam and not even start it. For the protagonist, being the first from the end also meant death. Zhu said to the girl in a dissatisfied voice that he really wanted to strangle someone. The protagonist thought he could intentionally set himself up to get injured during the exam. After that, he might not participate in the exam anymore. The guy was getting deeper and deeper into his thoughts. He was getting more and more worried. Zhu screamed loudly and very frightened. He was very afraid that he might not be able to avoid death. Jin told the students that today was their 3rd day of training. Therefore, the participants should have a certain understanding of the association and the intelligence department. After a short break, the final exam began. The twin at the table said in a disgruntled voice that she was very tired. She had been hearing repetitive phrases in her head. Edward replied angrily that he too had been hearing the same phrase in his head about not going to the bathroom in the wrong place. Van looked closely at the computer and said that this whole thing was a pathetic sight. Yu sat devastated at his desk. He told himself that his dying ability had awakened. The woman stood behind the desk with a pointer in her hands and looked attentively at the students. Qin glanced at the participants and said with a smile that they looked very tired. She asked if they were ready for the exam. Vanya looked up from his laptop and asked the woman what kind of exam awaited them. The student sternly asked the woman how much the material she had learned was related to the exam. Qin smiled and adjusted her glasses. She told the student that she would not make any comments. Vanya slyly told the woman from his seat that there would be a different exam for each participant. That's why she didn't tell anyone about the scope of the test. Qin responded to the student that she approved of his line of thinking. She eventually told the participants that she had nothing to tell them. The woman adjusted her glasses and told the students that the exam would begin in 30 seconds. She asked, "Is everyone ready?" The main character glanced at the woman and thought to himself with displeasure that another reincarnation awaited him. Qin loudly informed the students that they had 20 seconds left. Suddenly, the lights in the room went out abruptly. All the students were very scared. The participants fearfully called Secretary Qin and asked her what had happened. Suddenly, 15 seconds later, gas began to enter the room. Qin grabbed a small gas mask in her hands and told the participants that the countdown was beginning. The protagonist pinched his nose with his hand and realized that they were being attacked with anesthetic ether to knock him out. The woman in the gas mask stared piercingly and silently ahead. Qin was conducting the countdown and monitoring the participants. Edward and Wang began to lose consciousness. The main character looked around and decided that someone had decided to arrange a quest for them in reality. Shu looked ahead and decided that everything was irritating him. After that, he decided to take action. The main character looked around carefully and realized that he needed to hide. Huang touched the gas mask on her face with her hand and shouted to the students that the exam was starting. Wen lay unconscious on the floor. He gradually began to come to his senses and sighed. The guy opened one eye and looked to the side. He didn't understand why he had passed out. Yuan sat down on the floor. He noticed the other participants around him were unconscious. The guy looked around in surprise and asked his friends, "Where are they?" The protagonist realized with excitement that the organizers had used anesthetic ether to knock them all out and transport them to this place. The guy glanced at the wall. There were large letters painted on it between the doors. Vanya extended his hand to Edward and told him in a joyful voice that he had taken his laptop with him. The twin turned around and angrily told the boy that he had been addicted to computer games since childhood. She threatened to send him to the electric Buddha for therapy. A monitor on the wall lit up. An unfamiliar voice asked if the participants could hear it. The main character and his colleagues listened anxiously to the unfamiliar voice. Edward approached the monitor and asked the stranger, "Where are they now?" He realized there were cameras all around them. The people on the other side of the screen could see their every move. The stranger on the monitor smiled at the participants and said that they would be the judges at their exam. A voice informed the excited participants that they had entered the first stage of the examination to join the intelligence department. The judge on the monitor sternly told the people that refusal to take the exam would be considered as refusal to join the intelligence department. The judge told the participants that they had to choose one object from the table in front of them before the exam. Edward angrily replied to the stranger that they had never been told where they were. On the large table in front of the students lay various household items. Edward asked the judge in bewilderment why there was mustard among the things. Vanya sensibly said that the down jacket, Shiloh, and chocolate are in one group of things. Mustard, water, and sunscreen are in another group. Edward asked the boy how he understood all this. Van explained to the participant that the things were sorted according to their purpose. The guy looked at the boy with displeasure and said that he was ready to take his word for it. Van was unhappy that a person like Edward decided to join the intelligence department. The guy told his colleagues in a romantic voice that the intelligence departments had the most beautiful offices. Yuan ran up to the table and told his friends that they needed to choose things for themselves. The judge looked closely at the participants from the monitor and said that they had already made their choice. Each participant chose a specific item for themselves. Shu chose a warm jumpsuit for himself. The judge looked at the participants and said that they should divide into groups according to the chosen subjects. The twins were very surprised when they heard that they would have to separate. The girl said in fear that she would never part with her sister. The judge on the monitor angrily told the participants that the exam began after Secretary Jin finished the countdown. An image of a table appeared on the screen. The judge said the exam would be divided into 2 stages. Participants would be divided into 2 groups based on the subjects they selected. Afterwards, they would proceed to their respective rooms. The participants examined the objects in their hands with interest. The judge said that first, everyone must complete the first stage using the objects they chose. Then they will move on to the second stage. The team that presses the button first wins. A stranger on the monitor explained to the participants that the judges would be watching everyone's performance and would award points based on it. The main requirement for receiving points was pressing a button. The judge explained to the students that at the end, they would tally up their exam scores and the judges' scores. The participant with the lowest score would receive an appropriate penalty. The participants stood and listened attentively. People with a down jacket, an awl, and chocolate were supposed to approach the door. Participants with mustard, water, and sun protection clothing were required to come to door B. The judge told the students that they would be able to know exactly how far their opponents would go. The students turned to the side and noticed special wristwatches on the tables. Edward and Vanya prepared to take a pair of watches each. The judge told the participants that the bracelets would help them determine their progress and the progress of their opponents. The voice advised the participants to use every minute of their time to complete the stage. The twin in red called out to her friend in fear and rushed towards her. A very frightened girl ran up and hugged her friend. The judge informed the participants that the countdown was about to begin. In 10 seconds, all doors would close. If anyone did not pass through the door within 10 seconds, they would be considered to have withdrawn and would not be eligible to join the association. The girl, frightened, told her sister that they could not separate. The 43-year-old twin asked her sister in fear what they were going to do now. The countdown began. The main character told the girl that he would take care of her little sister. Shu looked at the girl from above and said that she could calmly go through the stage. The countdown continued. The twin closed her eyes and told the guy that she agreed. The girl hugged Chuan and told her in a calm voice that they would soon be reunited. The little sister closed her eyes in fear. She could barely keep from crying. The countdown continued and participants approached doors with different letters. The students stood and looked ahead in fear. The door in front of them began to open. Yuan shouted in surprise to his companions that they found themselves in a desert. The main character and his colleagues turned around and noticed that they were in the snowy mountains. The judge on the monitor said in an angry voice that the first stage had begun for the participants. A voice informed the participants that door number A was closing. A surprised Shu stood with his companions. The students felt a very strong cold. They began to shiver from the frost. Edward turned around in fear and shouted to his companions that they were in real mountains. The main character stretched out his hands and put a warm jumpsuit on Chuan. The companion looked happily at the guy and thanked him for his help. The protagonist turned around and saw snow-capped mountains all around him. He thought this place was a recreation of a real setting. Everything looked very realistic. Sue thought to himself that in the next room there was the same place that the association had recreated. Edward felt a very strong cold. He asked his friends in a shivering voice, what should they do? Chuan wanted to give the guy her down jacket. Edward looked at the girl and said that he could not let the lady freeze. The protagonist walked away through the snow. He told his friends that they needed to move. If they stood still, it would get colder. Shu warned his companions that they could develop hypothermia, followed by chills and psychosis. If they all kept moving, they would be able to withstand the cold. Edward told his friends in fear that there were no signs around. He didn't know where they should go. Edward walked with his friends. He said with displeasure that there was no clue or hint around them. Yu sternly told his companions that they needed to find their way to the building where the second stage would be held. Shu realized that the judges were currently watching their behavior. He had to act naturally so that no one would notice him. The main character ordered himself that he must remain calm. Shu walked accompanied by his companions. They did not feel the very strong cold. Edward shouted in a frightened voice to his companions that it had become even colder around them. Shu looked around with surprise and attention. He realized that the cameras were well hidden. The main character looked at the snow-capped mountains and decided that they could detect cameras. Edward rushed towards the protagonist in fear and asked him to hug him to warm him up. The girl handed her clothes to the guy and said that he could put them on. She herself was not cold. Edward promised the girl that he would only put on his down jacket for 5 minutes. He shouted in fear that the jacket mustn't freeze. Chun told her companions that as a child she often underwent training in places with harsh climates. She felt good. The girl pointed to a nearby cave to her friends. She told them that they could make a fire. Sue told his companions that there were only snow-capped peaks around them. If they stayed there for too long, they would develop snow blindness. The main character and his companions went into a cave to warm up. Chuan gathered a bunch of branches in her hands in the cave and prepared to light them. The main character asked his companion how many branches she found. Chuan told the boy in surprise that it was as if the branches had been specially prepared for them there. There wasn't a single tree nearby. Sue decided to himself that the organizers knew that they would find this cave and make a fire here. The main character looked around and realized that there had to be some kind of clue around. Shu asked the companions opposite him if they possessed fire abilities. Chuan answered that none of them possessed such abilities. The protagonist realized he couldn't show his special abilities to anyone. He would have to breed them himself. Shu thought to himself with displeasure that he was constantly getting into trouble because of Lin. The main character decided to tell his companions that they had only one way out. Chun took a small piece of wood in her hand. She said with a smile that she knew how to make a fire. The girl grabbed a stick with both hands and began to twirl it in the brushwood to light it. The protagonist watched his companion's actions with amazement. He was surprised because fire was produced by friction. Gradually, the girl's efforts began to bear fruit. Sparks began to appear near the stick. Very soon, Chun was able to light a fire in the cave with the stick. Edward was warming himself by the fire. He told his friends with a smile that it felt like they were relaxing at camp. The protagonist showed his companions the awl in his hands. He didn't understand why they needed it now. The girl joyfully shouted to the boy that the awl could be a hint for them in the first stage. They had to use all the selected items. The main character told the surprised girl in a surprised voice that he didn't think she was very talkative. Chun asked her partner, "Did she really talk a lot just now?" Edward reminded the girl that during her studies she constantly clung to her older sister and talked only about her. The protagonist reminded his companions that judges were constantly monitoring their behavior. Then they would be graded. They all had to show their best qualities. Shu thought to himself that Chun had excellent mental abilities. Edward shouted in an admiring voice that he wanted to dazzle the judges with his magnificence. The protagonist told his companions that they must now put all the information they had to use. He suggested that they find a layer of ice in this area. Edward heard something to the side and shouted at his friends to shut up. The guy grabbed the blade with his hand. He said with excitement that there was some noise from the side. The main character and his companion stood with their backs to each other to protect themselves. Edward excitedly told his friends that something big was approaching them. Another group of participants were at that time inside the hot desert. Wen walked along the desert sand accompanied by his companions. At that moment, the guy's watch started beeping. He decided to look at it. Vanya glanced closely at his watch. He told his companions that Group A was 5% ahead of them. Yuan looked ahead with great attention and told his companions that there was some task ahead of them. Van thoughtfully told his companions that they would now also move forward. The guy in the cave saw a huge white lump rolling towards her. Edward looked with great surprise at the strange white piece that was approaching him. The guy asked the stranger in surprise, "Where are his parents?" The little white lump looked at the man with great fear. He made strange sounds. Chun looked at the unfamiliar creature with interest and said that it could be a snowman. The girl joyfully shouted to the little white lump that he was a snowman. The creature joyfully shouted back. Chun, with great excitement, asked the little white lump, "Where are his mom and dad?" The unfamiliar creature was excitedly shouting something to itself and waving its two paws. The girl noticed with fear how a small white lump rushed towards her. The white creature joyfully rushed at the girl and pressed itself against her. The main character thought to himself with surprise that the unfamiliar animal was simply pestering Chun. Edward told his friends in surprise that he had expected something enormous to come to them. What they saw was a very small creature. The protagonist told his companion that there was something huge next to them. They couldn't let their guard down. Chun held the white lump in her hands and joyfully told him that he was a snowman. Suddenly, the main character and his companion heard a loud scream in the cave. Zhu said in an excited voice that a dangerous creature had appeared in front of them. The heavy footsteps of a huge monster were heard. He was walking through the cave towards the people. Edward was scared. He realized that a huge monster was approaching them. The main character and his companions were very scared. A huge snow mutant appeared. He approached the people and looked at them angrily. Yu stood silently and looked intently at the huge white monster. The white monster screamed loudly and prepared to attack the people. Edward became frightened and began to move away. He repeated the words about the monster to himself. The main character said in a calm voice that in front of them were the parents of the creature that was in the girl's arms. Chun looked closely at the white lump in her hands. The little animal looked at her with fear. The unexpected little animal took out a clawed paw and prepared to hit the girl. Chun was frightened. The unfamiliar creature hit her clothes with its paw with all its might. The little white animal jumped onto the head of its huge parent. The creature smiled cheerfully at the girl and waved its paw goodbye. Edward angrily shouted at the small creature that he was going to get what he deserved. The huge white monster looked angrily at the people and prepared to pounce on them. Edward pointed his finger at the little monster from above and called him a bastard. The protagonist looked at the huge creature and sensibly said that it was their clue. The Bigfoot lives in cold climates. Its tracks have been found during many expeditions around the world. Its length reaches 7 feet. The nervous man is 4 meters tall and his entire body is covered with white fur. The protagonist looked at the huge yeti in front of him and decided that it was better to call him a monster. Zhu remembered that the yeti had appeared before them after they had entered the cave. He decided to himself that the clues had appeared very clearly. The main character noticed out of the corner of his eye how the girl next to him jumped up and rushed to attack. Edward was very scared. He called out to his girlfriend in an excited voice. Chun swung her hand sharply and prepared to attack the yeti. Suddenly, there was a very strong explosion, and the girl was thrown back. After colliding with the yeti, the girl flew far back. After an unsuccessful attack, Chun landed on the ground near the wall of the cave. Edward looked at the girl with admiration and said that it was a strong blow. Chun got into a fighting stance. She shouted at the monster that betrayal is an unforgivable act. The yeti screamed angrily and prepared to attack the girl. The main character approached from the side. He shouted to the girl that she shouldn't rush. Chun fearfully explained to the guy that they needed to kill the monster, otherwise it would kill them. The protagonist told his friend that they didn't know what kind of battle the judges expected of them. There was no guarantee that after defeating the yeti, they would receive a clue to pass the first stage. Edward noticed that the monster had decided to attack them and shouted to his friends to be careful. The snowman stretched out his huge paw to grab the people on the ground. The main character stood motionless. He looked angrily at the attacking monster. The yeti stopped. He stood in front of the man and growled menacingly. Edward was very surprised. He didn't understand why the monster stopped. A small white animal ran up and stood behind its parent's paw. The protagonist looked thoughtfully at the yeti and said that he had a dislocation. Edward was surprised. He didn't understand what kind of dislocation the big monster could have. The protagonist quietly asked the girl if she could deal with the mutant while he was immobilized. Chun answered the guy that she could. The girl looked menacingly ahead and prepared for the blow. She rushed forward. The girl jumped high into the air and prepared to attack the monster in mid-flight. Chun swung her arm in mid-flight and prepared to hit the mutant. The girl swung her arm with all her might and hit the monster on the head. The yeti fell to the ground after an unexpected blow from a man. Edward was very surprised. He was amazed that the girl was able to deal with her opponent so quickly. Chun turned and approached her friends. She said the monster was unconscious. Edward, frightened, repeated to the girl that she had dealt with the mutant in one blow. The guy thought about it and realized that the monster had no dislocation. Something had really scared the Yeti. Azuya told his partner that the monster was only scary in appearance, but it could be dealt with. Edward told his partner that something was wrong. The protagonist explained to his friend with a smile that they couldn't have been given stronger monsters during the exam. Now they had to focus on finding the clue. Edward said in a thoughtful voice that the clue should be inside the little creature. The guy suddenly heard a suspicious noise from the side. He turned around along with the main character. Suyo told Eddie in a cheerful voice that he was getting the hang of it. His partner angrily replied that his name was Edward. The protagonist walked toward the small white creature. Edward angrily shouted that he was a prince. The little white animal looked at the man with fear. He wanted to hide behind a rock. The protagonist swung his leg and prepared to finish off the white animal. He decided to take a look at what was inside it. A girl and a guy were heading towards a small white animal. She asked him where the clue could be hidden. Edward grabbed his sword. He said the clue might be inside the little creature. Chun angrily shouted that the little creature needed to be cut open. The little white animal was very scared when he saw a man approaching him. Shu glared at the creature and told him to tell him something important or give him something. The little animal was weak and helpless. He held out a small key in his paws to the man. Shu very happily grabbed the key in his hands and prepared to leave. Edward and his friends headed toward the cave exit. A small animal remained inside. The guy's watch started beeping. He looked at it and assessed the readings. Edward smiled at the girl and shouted that she had a great hit. The judges watched the participants' behavior closely on the big screen. The boy, along with the other judges, looked closely at the screen and thought that this group aroused his interest. The boy looked closely and thought to himself that the main character was of interest to him. Inside the hot desert, Yuen and his companions underwent their test. The girl told the boys as they walked that people lost in the desert can see mirages of oases. As a result, the traveler can die of frustration and disappointment. Van explained in great detail to his companions how a mirage is formed by heat. The boy explained to his friends that mirages most often appear in one place. Researchers believe that the ruins may be located in such a place. The girl asked the guy whether they would have mirages ahead or not. The boy replied to his companion in a disgruntled voice that they had been walking for almost an hour. If it had been a mirage, it would have disappeared long ago. The girl said excitedly that the city before them might be real. Vanya looked ahead with great excitement. He said that soon they would be able to find shade and shelter from the sun. The participant was exhausted by the heat and took off her outerwear because of it. The girl looked around in fear and said that she was very hot. The participant sat down on the sand and said in an exhausted voice that she would rest here. Van explained to the girl that in this climate it was best not to expose her skin, as it could lead to dehydration. The girl told the guy that she had already trained in a similar climate with her teacher. She would definitely notice if her condition worsened. The girl told the boy that he was very resilient. At first, she mistook him for a nerd. Vanya told his companion in a displeased voice to get up. The boy glanced at his watch. He told his companions that they needed to find the clue as quickly as possible. Their competitors had advanced again. The girl told her friends with displeasure that there was sand all around, and she didn't know where to start looking. Yuen headed forward. He said there would be a clue in the city ahead. Van walked along the sand and didn't notice how Scorpio appeared near his shoes. Yuen sternly ordered his companion not to move. The boy turned around and asked the guy what had happened. A huge and dangerous Scorpio appeared on the ground in front of the people. He attacked it with a bright beam. The guy with the glowing finger stood and looked closely at the dangerous insect in front of him. Yuen told his friends that in front of them was a poisonous scorpion. This insect has a developed consciousness. The guy looked closely at the insect in his hand. He said that this type of scorpion is active at night and is almost impossible to notice during the day. Van shouted to his companions in a frightened voice that scorpions were moving in flocks. The girl and her boyfriend were very surprised when they heard about the scorpion flock. A frightened participant ran across the sand from a group of predatory insects. A huge herd of predatory scorpions ran after people across the sand. Van looked around and said that time in this place flowed differently than outside. It would soon get dark. The frightened Yuen pointed his hand to the side and told his friends that they needed to run there. The participants ran across the sand, and a whole flock of scorpions raced after them. Yen turned around and looked back at the insects, both frightened and angry. Wen suddenly stood up and turned around. He told his friends that they needed to deal with part of the scorpion flock. A bright glow appeared around Yuen's body. He was surrounded by lightning. A whole flock of scorpions ran towards the guy. He prepared to attack them. Wen screamed very loudly. He launched a bright lightning bolt against the scorpions. A bright bolt of lightning struck the scorpions. Van shouted in fear to his companion not to attack the insects again. Juan explained to his friend that the insects only grew more ferocious under attack. They needed to flee. Yuan stood and looked at the huge swarm of dangerous insects. Yuan ran to the side in fear. He shouted that the sand was collapsing under them. The guy turned around as he walked and noticed something rising from under the ground. Yuan and his companions fled and noticed a castle appearing in front of them. The girl turned around in fear and told her friend that the scorpions had left them alone. Van replied that he didn't know why that had happened. Yuan said thoughtfully that for some reason insects do not dare to enter the city. Suddenly, a huge and predatory monster rose from the sand. It stretched out its claw towards the people. A monster emerged from the ground and blocked the sun from the people. There were huge clouds of dust all around. Yuan looked at the huge mutant and said that it was about to move on the city. Van explained to his partners in a reasonable voice that the organizers wanted to force them to enter the city. Yuan looked at the city with excitement. He told his friends that if they entered, they would do as the wall ordered them. The guy's hand began to glow brightly. He told his companions that they might have to fight a swarm of scorpions. Van turned around and told his friends that their stamina drained in the desert, just like outside. If they destroyed a swarm of insects, a new one would appear. Eventually, they would all die of exhaustion. The guy told his friends that their only way out was to enter the city. The girl assumed a fighting stance. She asked her companions whether they would enter the city or fight. Vanya was deep in thought. He didn't know what choice the judges expected from them in a situation like this. Suddenly, the boy ran into the city. He shouted to his friends that they needed to go inside. There they would rest and figure out what to do next. The girl and her companions ran into the city at full speed. The judges watched their actions through a monitor. The boy turned around and asked the teacher how he was interested in how the exam was going this year. The man in the chair sternly demanded that the boy answer to the point. The subordinate replied to the teacher that this group was able to sort out the situation. The boy watched the monitor with great interest. He told the man that watching the participants solve the riddles felt like watching a detective series. The participants approached the sign and read that they needed to go into the temple to get a clue. The girl was surprised to find the handwriting on the sign very poor. Yuan told the girl that the organizers were trying to trick them. Van told his friends that the organizers had led them by the nose. They would most likely be deducted points for their actions. Yuan asked his friend whether they would now enter the temple or not. Juan happily replied that they would enter the temple, as that was what was expected of them. The boy slyly explained to his partners that they had fallen into the trap of their own free will. The girl approached the door. She told her companions that they could follow her. The organizers would not have let them die without a reason. Van happily explained to his companion that if they fell into a trap, it meant that they were prey. The boy closely watched the participants' actions through the monitor. He listened to them attentively. The judge happily said to himself that the end had come for all participants. Yuan, accompanied by his companions, walked inside the building. There was silence all around. The boy's watch beeped. He looked at its readings. Inside the temple, Van told his companions that the completion percentage had been updated. He asked if the door had closed behind them. The girl was shivering. She told her companions that it was very cold around them. Wen handed his companion some clothes and told her to put them on. The girl was surprised that the guy offered her sun protection clothing. Van folded his hands and looked closely at the unfamiliar box in the center of the temple. The boy told his friends that they should try to open the wooden box. The girl joyfully shouted to her friends that they had to go. The boy said to his companion with displeasure, so that she would at least think sometimes. The participant suddenly ran up and grabbed the box in her hands. The guys looked at her in surprise. The girl pointed her finger at the lock on the box and said that she couldn't open it. The participant turned around in fear and told her friends that they needed a key. Van approached the girl and told her to at least listen to others sometimes. The girl sat on top of the box. She told her friends that the organizers wouldn't bother with empty decorations. The boy walked slowly towards the box with the girl. At that moment, the floor beneath him began to crack. Yuan stretched out his hand in fear and shouted at his friend to stop. The boy stopped and looked fearfully at his feet in front of him. He realized that there was some kind of mechanism underneath him. The boy walked fearfully across the floor. The tiles under his feet began to shift. The girl stood on the platform, holding a wooden chest in her hand. She looked at her companions in surprise. The participant looked at her companions with interest and told them to come to her. Yuan shouted excitedly at the boy not to move. There was a mechanism underneath him. Yuan excitedly explained to the boy that the organizers would not have installed inactive mechanisms here. Suddenly, a loud noise was heard. The columns inside the temple began to shift. Yuan looked at it in fear. People looked at the temple walls in fear. The boy thought that an axe or a bunch of poisonous arrows might fly at them. Van looked anxiously at his feet in front of him and decided that it might be a classic trap. At this moment, someone started walking to the side. A cracking sound began to sound under the feet of the unknown monster. Yuan turned around in fear. He didn't believe that a living creature was approaching them. The boy thought to himself in fear that the roar was very loud. This meant that something huge was heading towards them. Suddenly, a huge axe swung. Someone decided to attack the people. The huge warrior swung his large axe to attack the people and cut down the columns. A tall fighter with an axe stood and looked with displeasure at the Yuan on earth. The guy got scared. He realized that they would have to fight against a stone brute with an axe. Suddenly, a warrior with an axe appeared from the side. He stood silently and motionless. Another fighter approached from the side. He threw a huge sharp blade to the ground. People got scared. They realized that they now had another rival against them. Yuan stood motionless on the ground and looked at the huge warrior with fear. Two huge warriors stood and looked down on the people from above. There were clouds of dust all around. The frightened Yuan couldn't understand why the two monsters stood there and didn't start attacking them. Yuan raised his hand and explained to his friend that as long as he kept his foot on the stone slab, the giants would not be able to move. Yuan asked his friend to give him time to think. Yuan looked ahead with concentration. He told his friend that he would think of something now. The girl with the chest in her hand shouted at the boy not to worry. She promised that they would protect him. Van looked at the girl in fear and shouted at her not to move. The girl calmly knelt down. She told her friends that she would have time to escape before the giants did anything. The monsters suddenly grabbed their weapons and swung. Yuan was frightened and looked at the giants with great excitement and did not understand what was happening. The demonic warriors swung their blades and prepared to attack the man. Van shouted at the girl with displeasure and asked what she had done. The participant calmly replied that she had simply put the box back in place. The boy told his companions in a soothing voice that no one would move now. Van excitedly explained to his friends that the giants were under someone's control. The protagonist and his friend stood in the middle of an icy lake. He didn't know where he could use the key in this place. Edward told his friends with displeasure that this was the first time he had gone through tests where there were no clues. The protagonist told his friends that he saw no clues that there was a treasure hidden nearby. Sue told his friends that the game's challenge was a special test for the intelligence department. Edward told him that the group's progress had stalled. They needed to speed things up themselves. Chun looked carefully at the ice beneath her feet. She said there could be a lot of space below the lake. The girl looked through the ice with interest. She said that there could be a huge building below. The protagonist glanced down under the ice and decided that this possibility couldn't be ruled out either. Edward hugged the girl and told her that she had a wonderful imagination. The protagonist activated his X-ray vision and peered carefully under the ice. She looked at his feet with great attention using X-ray vision. The guy was surprised to notice that there was a huge box under the ice. The protagonist looked at his friends. He needed to tell them there was something under the ice. He didn't want the judges to suspect it. Edward grabbed a large awl in his hand. He decided to try to break through the ice. The protagonist told his friends that a lot of money had gone into building the environment. Everything around them couldn't have been just for show. The protagonist told his friends that they had received a key that could open a chest or a door. Logically, there should be something under the ice below them. The main character thought to himself with excitement that his words should have convinced his friends. Edward held the awl in his hands. He said excitedly that with this large needle they could open or break something. The guy with an awl in his hands looked happily at his friends and said that he would do everything. The main character thought to himself that his companion turned out to be smarter than he thought. Chun asked her friend in surprise, "What is he doing?" Edward was hitting the frozen lake with an awl and told the girl that he was breaking the ice. The protagonist and the girl looked at their friend with displeasure. Edward smiled cheerfully. Chun looked at her friend and said that it was possible to break the ice with one blow. The guy told the girl that if there was something under the ice, then the impact could damage it. The girl told her friends in a shivering voice that it had gotten colder around them. She felt as if it was -10. The protagonist looked up. He said the temperature on the ice was controlled by humans. The judges didn't want them to stay there for long. Edward took off his outerwear and handed it to the girl. He cheerfully told her that a large man like him shouldn't wear a down jacket. Chun put on a thick jacket. She told her friends that there were no places around them to explore. The protagonist thought there was a building below the ice. They needed to get there. Because of the surveillance cameras, he couldn't use his ability to melt the ice. The main character told his friends that if any of them had fire abilities, they would be able to melt the ice. The protagonist glanced at his friends. He saw that they were cold and wouldn't last long. Shu, using his ability, could maintain warmth within his body. The judges watched the participants closely. The boy told the teacher that this group was progressing more slowly. In his opinion, the main character was quite interesting. The boy told the man that Shu was calm and reasonable, and that he also gave other people a chance to solve everything. The teacher held a cup in his hands. He told the boy that the main character seemed to not want to draw attention to himself. The boy asked the man what he thought about it. The teacher sat silently in the chair. The little judge remembered that in the cave, the Yeti had suddenly become numb. The protagonist was definitely stronger than the members of Group A. The teacher in the chair said he checked the list of all the participants. The main character didn't come to take the exam. Lin pushed him through. The teacher demanded that the boy call the girl here. He wanted to ask her what was going on. The teacher watched the video of the main character on the monitor attentively. The man sat in the chair and kept repeating the guy's name to himself. At this time, Edward was sitting on top of the icy lake and trying to break through its surface. He shouted that it was very difficult for him. Edward shouted angrily at his friends, saying that quests usually require hints. Now they were forced to rely solely on intuition. Chun extended her hands to her friend and said they would soon come up with something. The main character heard some noise from the side. He turned his head. The participants were scared. Someone shouted that there was some noise coming from behind the trees. Suddenly, some huge monster tore out a tree and threw it on top of the people. The girl very quickly took off her outerwear and shouted to her friends to be careful. The main character stood calmly and looked ahead. Behind him were his frightened friends. There was a very powerful explosion, and the girl was thrown far to the side. The snowman came up and placed his huge paws on the trees. Chun looked at the monster with fear. She was unhappy that he had come. The sound of a large number of feet was heard. Several huge, angry snowmen appeared from the side. Shu looked at the monsters with joy. He realized that with their help, the ice on the lake would quickly break. A huge crowd of snowmen walked forward across the lake towards the people. Shu screamed in fear that the Yeti had crawled out of the cave and brought friends. Shu thought to himself, satisfied, that he had good acting. The girl glared at the monster and said that there would be only one outcome for them. Shu shouted in fear to his friend that the Yeti must be dealt with like last time. Edward reached out and pulled out a dagger. He shouted to his friends that he would sort it out himself. Edward turned around and told the protagonist that his rapier had not yet hit anyone. The boy angrily rushed forward to attack the snowmen. The main character shouted to his friend to leave at least one monster for him to break the ice. A group of snowmen stood and looked at people very angrily. Chun looked at the monsters with fear. She didn't understand why they froze. The protagonist looked at the mutants. The Yeti stood motionless. The main character decided that they needed to see what the monsters were going to do. The snowmen rushed at Edward. The guy with the blade backed away in fear. Edward looked at the snowmen with fear. He didn't understand what they were planning. Suddenly, one of the monsters opened its mouth. A bright pink glow appeared from it. Edward covered himself with his hands in fear. He felt some kind of powerful energy in front of him. The guy felt a strong relaxation in his body. He began to fall and said that it felt good. Shu was very surprised. He looked at his companion with great surprise. The girl ran up to Edward and shouted that she would help him now. Shu shouted from behind to his girlfriend for her to stop. The main character thought with displeasure that his two friends were not allowing him to relax for a minute. The snowmen stood near the unconscious boy and talked to each other. Chun anxiously asked her friend how he was feeling. Edward replied that he felt great. The girl angrily asked the monsters what they had done to the boy. She didn't understand why Edward was behaving like that. The main character thought with displeasure that the snowmen had used a dirty trick against them. The monsters opened their mouths and began to attack people with multicolored energy. The girl covered herself with her hands to protect herself from the attack of the Yeti. Suddenly, Chun was struck by an unexpected feeling. She felt weak. The girl could no longer stand on her feet. She felt warmth and relaxation. The weakened Chun said barely audibly that she was very hot among the snowy peaks. She decided to take off her clothes. The main character ran up to his girlfriend and grabbed her by the shoulder. He shouted for her to come to her senses. Chun was in a semi-conscious state. She told the protagonist that she was very hot. The girl said in a barely audible voice that she was hot. She asked the protagonist if he was hot too. Yu sat next to his girlfriend and replied that he was not hot at all. There were monsters standing nearby. The snowman opened his mouth and began to attack the protagonist with energy. A very evil mutant directed streams of multicolored energy against people. Edward and his girlfriend were lying on the ground and couldn't get up. They felt intense heat in their bodies. The protagonist looked at his companions with displeasure. He realized that they no longer had any strength. Su told himself in a stern voice that this couldn't go on. There was a bright swirl around him. The protagonist closed his eyes. He prepared to attack the monsters telepathically. Zhu looked sternly at the mutants and demanded that they not ruin his plans. The protagonist looked closely at the mutants. He stood in front of them at a short distance. The monsters sensed a very strong energy from the guy. They began to lose strength. After being attacked by humans, the Yeti began to fall to the ground en masse, dead. The main character stood and looked at the bodies of the Yeti in front of him. The protagonist stood among the snow-capped peaks. The unconscious body of the Yeti lay before him. The frightened little animal climbed on top of the unconscious monster's body. Chun lay on the ground without strength and felt a very strong heat in her body. The girl was unconscious with her eyes closed. The main character stood silently and looked at the unconscious Edward and Chun. Hugh saw a message on his wristwatch. Group B was able to advance to 60%. The main character stood completely alone, silently looking at the snow-capped mountains. Gradually, it began to get dark in the mountains. Snow began to fall from above onto the ground. The girl and the guy were lying in a small hut. The main character dragged them there. Shu lit a small fire near the hut. He decided to use it to warm himself and help his friends. Edward woke up and asked the main character, "Is it really night already?" Edward anxiously asked the protagonist what had happened and why he couldn't remember anything. Shu slyly suggested to his friend that he try to stand up. The guy tried to get up. He told his friend that he couldn't feel his legs and that he seemed completely exhausted. Edward, barely standing on his feet, asked the main character what had happened. Zhu calmly explained to his friend that all his energy had been sucked out of him. The girl began to come to her senses in the hut. She opened one eye. Chun looked at herself in fear and noticed that she had no clothes. The main character told the frightened girl not to worry. Shu looked at the girl and explained that everything ended quickly and nothing had time to happen. Chun sat and looked away. She felt exhausted. Edward looked to the side and asked the protagonist what happened to the snow monsters. Zhu pointed his finger to the side and explained to his friend that the monsters were there. A large group of snowmen sat on top of the ice in a circle and raked something with their paws. The mutants worked diligently. The protagonist told his friends that the snowmen had decided to help them break through the ice themselves. Edward was very surprised. He shouted in fear, "This is impossible!" The main character sat near the fire and told his friends that he could not deceive them. Sue explained to his companions that he possessed the gift of influencing the psyche. He was able to hypnotize the Yeti. The main character thought it was a good thing that Lin hadn't left any information about his superpowers anywhere. Edward thoughtfully told his partner that people with such abilities would definitely be useful in the intelligence department. The boy watched the group of participants closely through the monitor. The protagonist told his friends that they needed to go and supervise the process. The little judge was surprised to hear that the main character could influence the psyche. His questionnaire didn't contain any information about this. The main character approached the snowmen and asked how they were doing. The monster was very scared when he saw the man. He screamed very loudly. The Yeti excitedly pointed to a hole in the ice above the lake for the protagonist. The protagonist looked into the big hole and said it was not bad. There were happy snowmen standing nearby. Edward told the protagonist that he did a very good job for the third level. The main character turned around and told his friends that the passage was open and they could go down. Edward looked at the main character and the girl and said that they were moving forward. Chun looked at her friends very cheerfully and happily and prepared to go with them. The girl, accompanied by Edward, jumped deep into the lake. The protagonist turned around and told the monsters that their work was done and they could go. The guy walked up to the edge of the ice and jumped forward. The mutants watched him with interest. The main character landed on the lid of a huge box after jumping. His friends were standing nearby. Yu stood silently on the roof of the huge box. His friends nearby were silent. The main character looked closely and noticed a hole in the lock on the roof of the box. Shu happily grabbed the key in his hands and said cheerfully that there was a lock in front of him. The protagonist put the key into the lock and turned it to open it. The watch on the guy's hand showed that Group A's success rate was 60%. The girl stood on the bridge. Her friends were next to her in the temple hall. Van asked his girlfriend Hua in fear, "How could she have gone forward?" The girl thought about it. She was trying to remember how she managed to get onto the platform. Hana told her friends that she simply didn't pay attention to anything and just walked by. Vanya, frightened, asked his girlfriend where she started moving from. Hana told her friend that she initially stood to his left. Then she jumped a couple of steps away. The boy looked carefully at the tiles beneath his feet. He was wondering where he should move. Homa smiled slyly at her friend and said that everything seemed to be fine. Van looked carefully at the tiles beneath his feet, wondering where to go next. The boy realized that the mechanism was definitely connected to the tiles. He didn't know in what order to press them. The boy realized that the tiles in the middle of the temple were a square with sides of 6 by 6 tiles. Vanya thought with fear that the mechanism might start if he went to the left and then pressed 2 plates. The boy angrily asked his girlfriend, which 2 slabs did she step on at the very beginning? Hoa explained to her partner with displeasure that no one remembers the tracks they follow. The girl told her friends that they could just go ahead and go around the mechanism. Van explained to his interlocutor that the exam couldn't be that simple. Hoa angrily shouted at her friends that they were always overthinking and complicating everything. She decided that the statues were too large and needed to be destroyed before the mechanism started working. The girl flexed her arms. She told the guy to provide all of this for her. Vanya showed the girl his hand in fear and told her not to rush. He decided to think for a bit. His girlfriend shouted back that she was fighting well. The girl suddenly rushed forward and shouted that she could handle it herself. The girl ran up to the big warriors at speed and prepared to attack them. The boys noticed with great fear that the giants had begun to move. The boy shouted in a frightened voice to his girlfriend to watch out. At this time, one of the giants opened its mouth to attack its opponent with red fire. Yuan was scared. He realized that the giant was preparing to attack. He activated the lightning in his hand. The girl noticed with fear how fire appeared in the mouth of one of the warriors. The girl looked ahead in fright and realized that she wouldn't have time to dodge. Yan stretched out his hands and began to attack the giants with bright lightning. Yuan used a bright lightning bolt and was able to cut off the head of one of the giants. The girl noticed with fear how red lightning hit the column next to her. The large column began to fall. Hua jumped up to stop it. Yuan shouted at the girl to stop the column from falling to the ground. Yan shouted angrily at the girl to jump aside. There were bright lightning bolts in his hands. The girl pushed herself away from the column in mid-flight and flew far to the side. Wen screamed loudly. He decided to destroy the column with the help of his magic. The girl suddenly pushed herself away from the column in mid-flight and flew to the ground. The huge crown shattered into small pieces after being struck by lightning, and the girl and the boy stood on the floor in fear. The frightened Vanya told his friends that they scared him to death. The boy shouted fearfully at the girl that she should warn him before doing anything. Hua stood to the side, dissatisfied. After a short pause, the girl frightenedly asked her friends for forgiveness. Yuan asked the boy if the statues had reacted to the girl's attack. The boy fell silent. He looked intently and attentively ahead of him. Wan told his friends that the judges had arranged everything so that they would advance further and not defeat the statues, but rather decipher the mechanism. Yuan replied to his partner that the statues move according to the decisions they make. Van told his friend that all they had to do was try. Using calculations, they could come to any conclusion about the next clue. Yuan looked at his friend and said that he was very smart, and he would leave the calculations to him. The boy excitedly asked his friend what he meant. Yuan looked at the boy and told him in a stern voice that they would swap. Yuan came up from the side and placed his foot on the tile next to the boy's foot. Van shouted to his friends with excitement that he would make sure that they all got out safe and sound. Yuan told his friends that he would find a way to deal with this too. The boy pointed at the girl and said that she would now follow his orders. He asked that she always think before acting. Hua bowed obediently to her friend. The boy thought for a moment. He carefully recalled how the girl had passed through the tiles. Vanya thought through the entire route in his mind that could be safe to pass through the tiles. After a little thought, the boy figured out that the area on the right side of the tile would be more dangerous. Van thoughtfully decided to himself that if he stepped on the moving part of the tile, it would activate the stone giant. The boy realized that the giant acts independently of how the person behaves. The tile and the board have some kind of connection, Vanya thought. He didn't understand what connected the squares in front of him. The boy decided to himself that the judges couldn't have just placed the squares. This wouldn't be an exam, but premeditated murder. The boy asked the girl where the 2 squares she had jumped over were. Hawa grabbed her head in fear. She couldn't remember her path along the tiles. The girl told her friends that she didn't remember exactly, but she might have walked past the squares that were in the center. Van asked the girl very distrustfully if she was sure. Homa excitedly explained to her friend that after landing, she walked several steps to get to this place. The girlfriend showed her friend with her fingers how she walked. She wasn't sure whether she simply didn't get up at the end. Vanya listened to the girl's story and explanation with great surprise. The boy happily told his girlfriend that all this could be an allusion to the 9 palaces of feng shui. Yuan thoughtfully explained to his friends that in a feng shui palace, the equivalent of 4 squares would be a palace. Yen looked at his leg. He said that this place was an odd-numbered palace. Van looked at the guy with interest and asked if he wanted to try. The main character looked slyly at the boy and said that they both knew who would take the risk. Van waved his hand at the girl and told her to be careful and defend herself from the statue's attacks. Wen pushed himself off the ground and jumped forward onto the tile. The guy landed on the tile and pressed it. He shouted to his friends for no one to move. Yuan stood on the floor tiles and tried not to move. There was silence all around. The guy told the girl as calmly as possible to step on the squares to her right. Hama looked very scared. She walked very carefully on the tiles on the floor. The girl joyfully shouted to her friends that nothing had happened, and that meant they were right. Vanya joyfully shouted to his friend that he had great luck. They could win at the casino if they got out of here. The girl shouted to her friends with a joyful voice that they were able to figure out the feng shui palace. Vanya happily explained to the girl that he had guessed it by accident. His girlfriend angrily shouted at her partner that he could have been mistaken. Yuan hugged his friend and said that the boy was a level 5 supercomputer that needed a little information to answer. Hana told her friend in a displeased voice that she would no longer call him a nerd. The participants approached the chest. Yuan said they just needed to open the entrance and they would be done. The girl asked her friends if they would come to life if they stepped on the tile. The boy explained to his friends that giants could only live if the odd palace pressed the plate. Van explained to his friends that the pressure should correspond to the 9 palaces of feng shui. The boy reached for the lock on the chest and prepared to open it. Yuan listened very carefully. There was complete silence inside. Unexpectedly, the lock opened very easily. The boy opened the lid of the chest. Vanya looked inside the chest with great surprise. His surprised friend stood next to him. The participants saw that there was a small red button at the bottom of the chest. The girl turned around and asked her friend if she should press. Vanya told his girlfriend to press. Hua reached inside the chest and pressed the red button. The girl pressed a button, and the tiles inside the temple began to descend in the center. The boy looked at his watch with interest to find out the level of completion of the task. Van noticed that the sensor on the watch showed that both groups had completed the task completely. A young man wearing glasses stood at the steps to the basement and looked down. The girl wondered if it was a trap, looking warily into the basement. To which the boy explained that even if it was a trap, they still needed to go down, since Group A's progress had also reached 100%. The comrade in glasses was the first to start descending the steps. Turning around to look at his friends, he asked them to go ahead because he didn't think they would be bored enough to install the mechanism here. Moreover, since the progress indicator showed that progress is equal to 100%, it means that the first stage of the survey has been completed, and the second stage should be next. As they were going down, Chunhua really hoped that her sister was not injured, and now they were approaching the door. The guy opened the door and immediately looked inside, trying to see what was inside. Just as he wanted to say something about the group that hadn't arrived yet, a healthy guy appeared in front of them. The big guy held the girl's sister and the fair-haired guy in his other hand very tightly. Edward greeted his little brother and exclaimed that he was very pleased to meet him again. The boys looked at them carefully. They realized that they had met their opponents here. Group A is a 3-member group and seems to have top-notch talent, but he can't help them in their group. The members of Group A seem to have fighting talent, and it will be a bit difficult. The girl wondered what happened to her sister's clothes, since she had just been through a battle. The fair-haired boy also thought that his appearance did not seem very handsome. A group member thought about this being an intelligent opponent, but the final test does not require the use of the brain or normal logical thinking at all. The boys decided to try to steal it. They started running towards the column. The girl asked Chuntian if she really wanted to steal from her sister. The sister replied that this was indeed a test, not a punching bag from Kong Young, after which she apologized. The girl couldn't understand why Chuntian was acting like a completely different person. She replied that she was actually no weaker than her sister. Chuntian decided to go first and began to run faster and faster, overtaking her. The girl grabbed her hand and asked what she was going to do. Chuntian started screaming and asking what she was doing, asking to be let go. Her sister replied that she had made herself clear and was asking her not to leave. Chuntian immediately asked what was unclear and again asked to let her go, since they were still on trial. The sister asked the girl what drug she was taking, looking into her eyes. Why did even her personality change in just one day, and how dare she yell at her sister? Chuntian asked to be released again and said that they would talk about it later. But the girl approached her sister again and said, taking her by the shoulders, that she would not let her go. Chuntian got angry and grabbed her sister by the hair. She called her names and said she would break her face. Her sister grabbed her hair in response and asked how dare she pull her bangs, and whether discipline wasn't important to her. She didn't even know if she should do anything about it. Chuntian exclaimed that since childhood, she has always stood in front of her, probably because she is afraid that she will overtake her. The sisters started fighting while the rest of the guys were already approaching their target. They turned towards the girls and each thought about it, trying to understand what they had disagreed about. The boys debated whether to approach and stop the fight. It wasn't a very nice sight to watch. The guy thought that this method really worked and could stop Chuntian and Chunhua. He approached the girl and said he had something interesting for her. Chun Tian asked what it was. The guy explained that during training, he saw her hiding behind Chun Hua and interacting little with them, so he thought she was an introvert. The girl didn't expect this and, getting angry, asked if they all thought the same. Then, Edward explained to her that they had finished the first stage of the test before Group B, so he asked them to rest and chat. Chun Tian lowered her head and said that her sister always thinks that she hasn't grown up yet, so she doesn't allow her to do anything. The guy replied that she didn't feel like she needed her protection and wanted her praise. If they meet later, they can do this. The others eavesdropped on the conversation. Chun Tian approached her sister and said that she was born 2 minutes before her. Did she really think she was older than her? She started screaming again, looking at her sister, saying she was going to break her face. Chun Hua asked what she had just said. The boys began to observe what was happening and looked with sadness at the two sisters who could not get along with each other. The guy who got between them thought that the plan had gone pretty well, except that the two had become a little out of control. Next, you just need to let Edward detain Yuan Zhou, and he thinks that he is not able to defeat him, so he can press the button. This will be both a discount for Chun Hua and a rating boost for Chun Tian. It will also allow Yuan Zhou and Edward to fully demonstrate their abilities. In this round, Yurchin and he will be relatively in the middle of the road. Then he will press the button for additional bonus points, and he will be in a safe position. The guy considered himself a little genius. A blonde-haired boy approached him and said he would hold Yuanjie while he pressed the button. The boy asked if he was sure about that. Then he would detain Yurchin and leave Yuanjie to him. The boy decided that this was very good, since it was exactly what he wanted. Edward was pleased with this plan, and they came to an agreement since victory belonged to their Group A. The guy with glasses told Yuanjie that Edward wanted to take advantage of this moment. The boys began to approach each other, and Edward took out a sharp saber, wanting to deal with his opponent. He asked who said that he was going to take advantage of this moment. He called himself an open and honest man and extended his saber towards the boy. Wanja asked his comrade to press the button and explained that he would deal with him here. The comrade understood the boy, and exhaling heavily, began to make his way towards the switch. He held his hands in front of him, trying to block the powerful gust of wind. It was very difficult for him to resist such a hurricane flow, and he did not let go of his hands. The wind was too strong, and he made his way step by step, trying to resist it. When the enemy saw the boy heading for the switch, he realized he hadn't thought of that. Now he was faced with a dead end. Xiaowen was in a hurry about his business and thought that he would definitely succeed. But beads of sweat began to trickle down his face. After all, his squad had reached the final objective first. He started clutching his head and screaming that this was the end. Xiaowen didn't know what to do now. What was he even thinking when he agreed to join this damned association? Or maybe he couldn't think at all. The boy in glasses asked him what was wrong. He stood in the corner and kept making faces. He wondered if he was even going to fight him today, or if he was just going to stand there and make faces. Meanwhile, Edward called his enemy a worthy opponent and exclaimed that he was no slouch either. The boy began to use his abilities and released an arrow of courage from his hands. He began to use a level 5 strike, and a bright fiery flame flew towards the enemy. Edward called Yuanjie to him and asked him not to stand there like a pillar, as he would be killed now. Then the boy began to use his abilities, and a bright ball with lightning burning inside it began to spin in his hands. These lightning bolts were like flashes of blue light, and a whole salvo rose towards the enemy. Edward didn't expect this and was simply shocked by Yuanjie's powerful strength. There was a powerful explosion, and blue lightning flew in different directions. The boys began to fall to the ground from the force of the wave. Edward tried to shield himself with his hands, but it was no use. He realized that this boy had used extraordinary abilities and was very surprised by it. Yuanjie exclaimed as he approached the enemy that it was now his turn. Edward asked the enemy to slow down as he was very scared. Meanwhile, his comrade was saying that they had arrived and that today he would die again. The boy with glasses noticed that his friends were fighting, but he didn't give a damn, just staring at the ceiling and spitting at it. His leg is injured. Chunhua is busy with her sister. Yuanjie is still busy with Edward. The boy thought that it would be easy for him to pass and finish this exam. Meanwhile, Edward and Yuanjie continued to fight, and they did not let go of their swords. They met again in a fierce fight, and the battle continued. Both boys were very strong. Edward tried to hit his opponent, but he couldn't hit him. The guy realized that Yuanjie was too fast and he didn't have time to dodge his blows. Meanwhile, Xiaowen, already grimacing, continued to think about what he should do. Suddenly, a good idea struck him. He needed to make sure there were no winners. But how to pull this all off without unnecessary publicity, he continued to think about it. An idea appeared in this guy's head again, and he decided to act according to his plan. He clenched his fist and exclaimed that Edward needed to hold on. Then Edward asked him how the boy was. Xiaowen asked the guy to help Chuntian first, and he himself ran to carry out his plan. The guy decided to figure out the right trajectory to start with. Hopefully that shorty wouldn't get there before him. Meanwhile, the bespectacled man thought that he had turned around and run away at that moment. He was probably not all there. Xiaowen was indeed acting strangely, and he had already approached the little sisters. They were very angry and turned to him and asked what he wanted. Xiaowen asked the girls not to quarrel, as it was just an exam. He suggested they sort it out later. They are sisters after all. So what if Chunhua is stronger? It doesn't matter. The guy pitted their heads against each other and decided to drive them crazy so they would punch him in the face. Chuntian turned to Xiaowen and asked him why he was saying that. He then asked if he was right. She herself said that she did not want to live in her sister's shadow and silently apologized to the girls since it was a matter of life and death for him, and he would definitely ask them for forgiveness later. Chunhua was quite smart and asked if he was trying to cause a quarrel between them. Xiaowen approached her and asked if he'd said anything wrong. Was she afraid that her sister would one day surpass her? He came close to the girl's face and exclaimed that it was okay. People lived with worse than that. Finally, he waited for the moment he had been waiting for so long, and the girls were already approaching him, clenching their fists. They found themselves near the enemy's face and swung their fists in unison. Meanwhile, Edward had already flown far to the side from his opponent's powerful blow. Yuanjia did his job by knocking Edward onto his back with a powerful blow. He pushed him away with all his strength, and the opponent fell, hitting his back on the stones. The bespectacled man, observing everything, exclaimed joyfully that the victory was theirs. There was a powerful flash of fire, and a bright flame illuminated everything around. Wenjia asked Wantong to be careful and rushed forward to warn him. A powerful explosion sent Xiaowen crashing into rocks. Thick clouds of smoke rose into the air. The girls were very surprised and asked if they had hit him that hard. Meanwhile, the woman stood with her arms crossed over her chest near the rating board. She was serious and her gaze was very stern. The boys sat at the desks in front of her. They were all waiting for what they would be told today, and their faces were angry and serious. The woman exclaimed that she had asked them not to go too far. They had turned a reconnaissance squad test into a combat squad test. Since no one pressed the button, no one will receive any points for it. And if multiple people sabotage the button, their first month's bonus will be deducted. The sisters lowered their gaze to the floor and said that they didn't think that Xiaowen would fly so far. Edward also sat sadly, and with tears in his eyes asked why they were deducting his bonus. The woman smiled slyly, and, spreading her arms out to the sides, exclaimed that she would now announce the test results. Xiaowen thought he definitely shouldn't take first place. He'd intentionally made several mistakes during the test, and for each one, he should lose points. Apparently, Yuanjia performed very well and took first place. And the most important thing for him is to live longer. The boy thought about this. He decided that Xiaowen had been acting too strange from the start, and he furrowed his brows and lowered his head. It was obvious he could press the button, but instead he ran back. He may be paranoid, but his abilities aren't even suitable for reconnaissance. And what is he even doing here? The woman began explaining the criteria they used to judge the contest and who had won first place. Xiaowen began to sweat profusely. He was very worried and thought that if he did not take first place, he would promise to honor the Buddha for at least 3 days. Wenjia noticed, looking at the guy, that he was very worried about this rating. And so, all waiting, her eyes closed. The woman paused, then looked around at those around her. Pausing for a moment, she exclaimed that Yuanjia was in first place. Xiaowen was very upset and immediately stood up from his seat, stretching out to his full height. The woman looked at him and asked if he was unhappy with the result. Then the guy sat down on the chair again and told her no. Suddenly, he jumped up from his seat and began shouting joyfully to the entire audience. Xiaowen was so happy that he didn't get first place that tears even glistened in his eyes. The girl walked up to the board and said that she would announce the last place. She asked Chunhua if she agreed that she had performed the worst. Chunhua lowered her head and, smiling sadly, replied that she agreed. The woman explained that Chief Lin would hand down her punishment later. The girl sighed sadly and didn't know what to say. Chuntian walked up to her sister, casting a sad glance at her. Edward watched the scene unfold, anger welling in his heart. He glanced toward Xiaowen. The guy looked at him and asked what had happened to him. Xiaowen sat at his desk with his head bowed. He exclaimed that everything was fine and he was fine. Edward asked if he was crying because he didn't take first place and asked him not to worry so much. After all, they would have to work together in the future, not alone. Xiaowen replied that he was right and asked them to ignore him. The woman with the notepad in her hand explained that it was just a small test, so that they could reflect on their mistakes and avoid repeating them in the real world. She said that everyone is free tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning. Headmaster Lin will meet with everyone. The girl raised her hand and, saying goodbye, exclaimed that she still had to work. Edward approached Yuanja and congratulated him. He asked if the boy possessed the lightning talent. Yuanja suddenly thought of Shu Xiaowen, so he must be from the Yuan family. Edward approached the boy again and asked if he could hear him, but he seemed not to hear what was asked. Meanwhile, Xiaowen walked down the corridor with great satisfaction and his arms outstretched. He reached the elevator and was about to enter. Then the door opened, and he saw a girl with a child. He told her that she had not yet fully recovered, but she was already forced to return to work. Her combat unit was too harsh. Then the girl explained to the boy that they would meet new members tomorrow, so she was discharged from the hospital early. She and the boy exited the elevator, while Xiao Wen walked inside. He seemed to be floating in the clouds on his own wavelength. It was unclear what was going on in his head. The boys wondered why he was so happy. He was completely different, and his joy knew no bounds. It felt like he'd won the lottery. Meanwhile, someone called Lin Miao Miao and said that they were giving her another week and no more. The girl asked to wait a little longer, but they threatened that if she couldn't return the money, she would have to pay with her body. Lin Miao Miao didn't seem too upset and asked not to worry. Xiaowen told the girl that she was very calm, even though she was completely in debt. And why on earth did she buy that lipstick? If she has extra money, it's better for her to pay off her debt. Lin Miao Miao wondered if she really should be deprived of pleasure because of her debts. While gathering her hair into a ponytail, the girl explained that she always lives every day as if it were her last. She explained to the guy that there is always a way out in life, and there is no need to think about the future. In fact, she didn't think about the future, but lived each day as if it were her last. Lin Miao Miao walked up to Xiao Wen and said that she had another cash cow like him. The guy looked at her with a sad look and replied with displeasure that he almost died because of her. Lin Miao Miao asked him not to be angry and said that she could satisfy him in any way he wanted. Xiao Wen replied that it was not necessary, and the girl said that she was told that if she did not repay the debt, she would pay with her body. In that case, she could repay him now. The guy looked at her rudely and asked her to get off him. Then she asked if he hated her. Xiaowen replied that he didn't hate her and that they were simply collaborating. The girl had an upset, frightened look, and she blushed a little. Suddenly, her little sister came into the room and said that she had found out something. She was very surprised when she saw the guy and asked what they were doing there. Lin Miao Miao became upset and jumped off his lap, asking why she hadn't knocked on the door. Xiao Wen also asked why she was there. The girl modestly lowered her gaze and replied that the door was open, so she came in. She wondered to herself if they really had some kind of relationship. Lin Miao Miao asked Xiao Wen to remember to close the door behind her in the future. The guy sadly replied that he would not forget, thinking about something completely different, and not about stupid things. Lin Miao Miao said that one of them could become her assistant after a 3-month internship. The girl thought she needed to act natural to avoid suspicion. Apparently, she wasn't acting natural. Xiaowen asked why he was going through all these tests when he could simply become her assistant. If not for his brilliant ideas, she would now be accompanying his corpse to the crematorium. Lin Miao Miao replied that she couldn't take him as an assistant. The association had long wanted to recruit someone from the Wang family, and then the Wang family's second lady arrived. Naturally, he had priority. The little sister came up to them and, approaching the guy, asked for forgiveness. Xiaowen told her not to apologize, and from now on they could be considered half-colleagues. Lin Miao Miao couldn't understand why he wasn't being so kind to her, and asked him to speak soon. Xiao Wen replied that he needed to discuss something with her. It is his fault that Chunhua took the last place in this battle, and that is how it is. Lin Miao Miao exclaimed that this wasn't actually the case. She'd watched all the test footage, and he had nothing to do with it. Xiao Wen explained that he was the one who started the fight between Chunhua and Chun Tian. He also destroyed the button, so they had nothing to do with it. The girl again said that he had nothing to do with it, and even without his intervention, she would have been the last one. She knew perfectly well what the test was about, but even there, she couldn't control her emotions. How would she handle the tasks in real life? Xiaowen thought about her words, and there was a hint of sadness in his gaze. After listening to the girl, he said that he understood everything and headed towards the sofa. When he sat down on the sofa, he asked what they would eat today, because he was hungry and had not eaten anything for several days. Lin Miao Miao suggested they try it with Ike. The guy asked what she was thinking. Then the girl asked why he couldn't even order food. He just won a bonus and could treat them to shashlik. Xiaowen explained that because they broke the button, there would be no bonus this month, and he would have to work as a courier again. Lin Miao Miao got up from her chair in anger and asked why he didn't tell her about this earlier. The sister became worried and asked Lin Miao Miao what had just happened to her. But the girl approached Xiaowen and again asked why he hadn't told her about it. She had only asked for a deferment of her debt because she was counting on his bonus. The boy replied that he thought she knew about it. The sister asked them not to fight, but the girl continued to chase him with her fists. Xiaowen asked the girls if they minded spicy food, and looked at them, waiting for an answer. They both replied that it was no problem, and that they had nothing to eat anyway, so even if it was spicy, it would be fine. The guy asked the girls to put something on the table because the dish was too hot. Lin Miao Miao replied that she should have said this earlier and put down a book. She said that it was very good that there were at least books here for such a task. A few days after Xiaowen passed the entrance test, Lin Miao Miao and Wang Yiki found a designer to remodel the apartment and add some furniture. The boy smiled and said they'd have to make do with that for now. Next month, when he got his paycheck, he'd buy something tasty. Wang Yik, closing her eyes, said that it was better to eat home-cooked food. The prices in restaurants were simply exorbitant. Lin Miao Miao asked if even the Wang family's second lady could afford it. The girl replied that she no longer lived with her family and that money didn't just fall from the sky, although her sister always brought her back. Lin Miao Miao said that her sister looked very young and asked why she even listened to her. If she had joined the association earlier, she certainly wouldn't have gone hungry. And why did she even agree to that marriage? The girl replied sadly that she had no other choice. Lin Miao Miao smiled in response and exclaimed that they would no longer talk about sad things and asked for a drink instead. And so the glasses clinked, and the guys decided to throw back a glass to their health. Every past life of Xiaowen was exhausting, and there was not a moment of pleasure in it. Although in this life, due to the appearance of Lin Miao Miao, the plan he had come up with began to go downhill. The girls did lift his spirits, and they were very sweet. Xiaowen downed another glass as he thought about this. He assessed the situation and smiled. The boy decided that overall everything was pretty good and calmed down from his good thoughts. Lin Miao Miao noticed Xiaowen's gaze and called out to him in a gentle voice. She blushed a little, cast a sweet glance at him and asked if he had ever been in love. The boy asked why she was asking about this, and his look stopped being so cheerful. Lin Miao Miao explained that she was interested in what kind of girls he liked. Xiaowen thought about this and began to eat noodles while thinking about it. Then the girl came closer to him and asked him to tell her as she was waiting. Lin Miao Miao looked at him and said that, for example, only some fool could like him. Xiaowen asked the girl about her debts and decided to eat after all. When he didn't hear an answer, he glanced warily to the side where the girls were sitting. The boy noticed that they had fallen asleep. They were lying on the sofa, cuddled close to each other. Xiaowen realized that they were drunk after just a few glasses, which surprised him greatly. He thought that if they didn't know how to drink, it would be better if they didn't do it while looking at them. The boy walked up to the sofa and asked the girls to wake up quickly and go to their beds. They didn't hear because they were sleeping very soundly, and he decided that they were like a thorn in the side. He was saying that the two of them would catch a cold if they slept there, and that they needed to get some sleep and then go back to bed. But they slept too soundly, and it looked like they would sleep like that until the morning. But he still decided to take them, because they could really freeze here. When he picked up Lin Miao Miao, she began to say to herself that her stomach hurt very badly. Xiaowen replied that it seemed like she had drunk a lot, which was why her stomach hurt. He carried her into the room and laid her on the bed and began to cover her with a blanket to make her warm. But suddenly the girl grabbed him by the collar and said that she really wanted some water. She pulled him towards her and he asked her what she was doing, a little scared. The boy realized, looking at the girl, that she was still sleeping and hugging space in her sleep. She pulled Xiaowen close to her again and said that she really wanted some water. Then the boy replied to Lin Miao Miao that he would now bring her something to drink and left. He walked out the door, slamming it, and the girl continued to sleep in a not very good condition. Meanwhile, the boy returned to Wang Yik's room. She too continued to sleep. Xiaowen decided, looking at the girl, that she also needed to be carried to the room as quickly as possible. The boy carefully picked up the girl in his arms and began to carry her out of the room into the corridor. She also slept very sweetly, and a delicate pink blush glowed on her cheeks. He carried Wang Yike through the corridor to her room and laid him on the bed as well. Xiaowen sighed heavily and decided that all that was left for him to do was bring some water for Lin Miao Miao. But suddenly he was very surprised and his gaze fell on the girl who was sitting in front of him. He couldn't understand why she was here. Then the girl, looking at him, said that there were two drunk and defenseless women in front of him, and he didn't even grope them. She considered him a very unusual guy because she was very surprised by this. The girl began to tell that initially her sister ran away and met him by chance, but now he's kidnapped her and she wonders if he's taking on too much. Xiaowen replied that she was already an adult. If she didn't want to get married, then what could he do? The girl explained that her sister was beautiful, like a petal that had not yet blossomed. If you plant this petal in the wrong pot, it will dry out sooner or later. Xiaowen looked at the girl and asked if she enjoyed taming others. She then asked him if he thought she was being unfair by forcing her to marry into the Ouyang family. As a daughter of the Wang family, she had enjoyed the luxurious life afforded her by the Wang family, and now she had to somehow repay her family. Xiaowen asked if she was enjoying the luxurious life her family afforded her, and why she was deciding her sister's fate if she was born first. Or he thinks he can shape another person's destiny. When he said this, the girl's expression changed. She explained that she hadn't had a talent for hypnosis since childhood, and in her early 20s, she was only a level 3. Did he think it would be okay if she got married and someone else took over the family? Xiaowen, after listening to the girl, looked sternly into her eyes and said that she should decide what to do. Suddenly, the door to the room began to open slightly, and Wang Yike appeared on the threshold. She looked sadly at the girl and told her sister that she didn't expect to see her here. Then the little sister looked at her and asked if she had been sleeping, and she thought that, judging by the expression on her face, she must have heard what she was saying. The girl decided that Xiaowen was to blame for everything. Wang Yik explained that she was thirsty and woke up and asked if she had come to take her back. The sister looked back into Wang Yike's eyes and replied that she had understood her correctly. Xiaowen pointed a finger at Wang Yihan and asked her not to forget where she was. Yike wouldn't go anywhere with her, so she might as well forget about it. Wang Yihan immediately stood up and looked at him, shouting at him not to provoke her. Looking her in the eye, she said that it was her family's business, and she shouldn't meddle in something that wasn't hers. Xiaowen asked the girl to get out of there. Wang Yihan told the boy that they could even bet that she would return to her family herself. Xiaowen looked her sternly in the eyes and drew his eyebrows together. Lost in thought, he said nothing. Wang Yihan told her sister not to forget that she was getting married soon. She explained to her sister that she owed everything to her family and headed for the exit. Wang Yike thought sadly about her words and lowered her head, feeling very upset. Meanwhile, Xiaowen became seriously angry and, gritting his teeth, approached Wang Yike. He asked her not to worry about what her sister said and just stay here. The girl immediately thanked the boy and said that she would go to bed, wishing him good night. Xiaowen couldn't understand one thing. Why was he angry when it was none of his business? He thought that perhaps he shouldn't have gotten so worked up, but he still decided that he shouldn't care. And so a bright sunny morning dawned. A wide, spacious association loomed before us. Xiaowen walked up to the parked moped and said that he had paid a whopping 200 yuan to have it repaired. He talked to his motorcycle and asked it not to break down anymore. Before he could finish speaking with the piece of iron, a comrade appeared behind him and greeted him. Looking at Xiaowen, he asked if they would go with him. They barely spoke during the test, and he wondered if he wanted to continue working as a courier in the future. Xiaowen replied that he certainly did, and the guy asked what area he usually delivered to. Xiaowen replied that it was closer to home. The guy thought he was being weird because yesterday when the results were announced, he kept staring at him. Wenjie told the boy that after being hit by Chuntian and Chunhua, he looked completely normal and didn't even have a bruise. Xiaowen replied that he was recovering quickly, to which Yuanjie remarked that it was very impressive. Xiaowen decided to keep his distance. Yuanjie said that the other day everyone had presented their abilities and only he was left. Xiaowen closed his eyes, smiled, and replied that he had a spiritual ability. The boy asked what he meant about spiritual ability. Suddenly he felt something and cast a contemptuous glance somewhere to the side. He put his hand forward and a powerful blue flash like lightning occurred. There was a powerful explosion and a column of bright fire in the form of lightning flew in the direction he directed it. It was a whole whirlpool in the form of a tornado, and it mixed with lightning into one. Xiaowen, looking at what was happening, realized that the boy had just absorbed lightning. They both looked at what Yuanjie had just done. The boy knew what he was doing. He grimaced evilly and told Xin Tianxing that he had finally appeared. A guy emerged from the spatial whirlpool and spread his arms out to the sides. He asked if Yuanjie was willing to die for his sins and called him the young master of the Yuan family. The boy responded by asking for what sins he had to die. He did not let go of his hand and it glowed with a bright blue fire in the form of lightning. Wenjie looked at his opponent and exclaimed that this was obviously all because of him. Then the guy replied that he had only killed his sister, and was it really necessary to kill all his brothers in return? Besides, he was just doing his job and a person approached him, that's all. Yuanjie continued to be angry and asked who had given him this order. But the enemy decided not to answer and grimaced and asked him who knew about this. The boy continued to press him and asked him to tell immediately. The enemy cried out, gritting his teeth, that he was going too far, and looked at him sarcastically. A blue circular portal appeared in front of him, which he had just approached. Everything around was glowing with bright blue rays and the guy stood calmly nearby. The rays began to spin and swirl, mixed with blue lightning as if in a whirlpool. Wenja was very surprised and looked closely at his opponent. Showin moved away as he decided that it was none of his business and had nothing to do with him. He decided he wouldn't get involved in this matter, but he thought it was somehow wrong. Their battle looked like something out of a fantasy movie, and he found it very interesting. His opponent was strong enough, and he watched what was happening. Xiaowin said that Yuanzhou was unlucky, and his opponent's abilities were perfect against lightning. The enemy had already called Yuanzhou a scoundrel, because he thought that he was at least strong, since he could kill all of his brothers. He started swinging his legs, and she exclaimed that she didn't think he was such a weakling. He thrust his strong fist forward and moved towards his enemy. He dealt a powerful blow to Yuanzhou, sending him flying backwards and causing blood to spurt from his mouth. The boy hit his back very hard and shards of glass flew in all directions. He flew back across the room after such a powerful and crushing blow. The enemy approached him and asked how this happened. Xiaowin wondered why he was here and decided that he couldn't just stand there and watch Yuanzhou get killed in front of his eyes. His sister seems to have died a horrible death, and he seems like a good guy. This is what Xiaowin thought about him, not knowing what to do, whether to help his comrade or not. Meanwhile, the enemy had already clenched his fist again and began to approach the boy. When he wanted to hit him, Yuanzhou grabbed his fist with his strong hand. Then the enemy smiled and said that it seemed like he could do something after all. Wenja didn't know what to do as his attacks were completely ineffective against him. The opponent wanted to hit the boy again and swung his leg upward. Wenja once again concentrated all his strength into his hand and it glowed with bright purple lightning. He raised his hand up and pointed it straight towards the enemy, screaming, "Die!" The bright rays almost reached him when the enemy began to dodge them very deftly. He smiled slyly again and called the boy an unlucky fool. The bright flash continued to spin around the guy, but nothing happened. The enemy exclaimed, throwing up his hands, that it was all useless. He approached Yuanzhou and asked him to simply surrender as he had no choice. The boy stood with his eyes closed as if meditating and a bright blue light glowed around him. Suddenly, he opened his eyes as if something had happened in his body. He completely glowed with blue lightning and put two fists together. He began to scream, spreading his arms out to the sides, and his eyes lit up with white emptiness. The enemy asked him if he had decided to use electric shock to strengthen his own flesh, and again called him a fool. Wenja began to ask again who the person was who gave him the order for his sister. He was very serious. Then the enemy asked why the dead man needed this information. He smiled and said that he still couldn't defeat him, because he was much stronger. He continued to stand calmly, even as bright lightning approached his face. A powerful explosion occurred after Yuanzhou's powerful blow, and the enemy was sent flying far back. The boy grabbed his elbow with his hand and looked towards his opponent. He actually hit his enemy, and streams of scarlet blood began to flow from the guy's mouth. He asked how the boy dared to hit him in the face and whether he even knew how much money he had spent on his beautiful face. The angry enemy began to approach Yuanzhou to strike. He decided to attack the boy and was already close, but Yuanzhou made another blow. This blow was even stronger than the previous one, and the enemy grabbed his bleeding face with his hands. He fell to his knees and began to cough up blood, being very surprised by this turn of events. The guy began to rise from his knees and asked what was actually going on. He didn't expect such a powerful blow from Yuanzhou, and his gaze was no longer so confident. The boy stood in front of him and continued to glow with bright blue lightning. He was very angry and again asked his opponent who it was and who directed him. He put pressure on him and asked him to tell immediately because he was ready to kill him. He was ready to finish off this scoundrel if he did not tell who hired him. He hit him with all his might, and he flew back, hitting his back against the rocks. Yuanzhou asked him to answer him immediately. The boy wanted to avenge his sister, so he couldn't vouch for what was happening in his soul. But the enemy also hit him with a very strong blow, and a lot of blood splashed around. Yuanzhou was slightly broken and fell to his knees, coughing and spitting blood. He clutched his heart and was unable to rise to his feet due to the force of the blow. His opponent laughed maliciously, clenching his teeth. Streams of scarlet blood flowed from his mouth as well. He said, looking at the boy, that everything happened faster than he thought. He grabbed Yuanzhou by the hair with his hand and pulled him towards himself, lifting him up. He said, looking at him, that every cell of his body felt a burning sensation and asked if he liked it. After their struggle and a powerful explosion, clouds of thick white smoke rose into the air. The enemy lifted Yuanzhou by the hair and let him go, and he fell to the ground, exhausted. He too was shabby and, sighing heavily, said that he had caused him a lot of trouble. He came closer to him and asked how he managed to wound him in the first place. He had just recently looked at him with such furious eyes, and now, could he open them? In his last moments, his sister looked at him and his brothers with such sad eyes. She cried and screamed for them not to kill her. The enemy, approaching the boy's face, said that she was very beautiful, and he and his brothers could not restrain themselves. Meanwhile, Xiaowen stood somewhere to the side, thinking about something and looking ahead. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the moped in the basket, and the phone rang. He began to lift the towel to see what was underneath. The phone in the pocket of the guy who had just dealt with Yuanja vibrated. He was asked not to linger near the association, and to finish his business quickly, and then leave. The guy understood the command and replied that he would do so, looking down. He stood thoughtfully and, closing his eyes, became a little sad. He asked that Yuanje's family, not him, be blamed for this, since he understood who had directed him. But the boy did not have time to find out the whole truth, and lay face up, exhausted. The enemy raised his leg above his head and decided to send him to his little sister. But suddenly, Comrade Yuanjie grabbed his leg and tried to move the boot away from the boy's head. There was a powerful explosion, and stones flew around after the coup. The enemy was very surprised, and looked with interest at the one who had just dared to hit him. Xiaowen approached him and asked if he had seen his keys. The opponent couldn't figure out where this guy came from, and he blocked his blow so easily. He asked who he was. Xiaowen replied that he was looking for the keys to his moped and thought he'd lost them somewhere around here. But the enemy did not calm down, and again began to ask who he was and what he wanted from him. Then the boy asked again if he had just told him that he was looking for the keys. The guy said he remembered him and that he had just been with Yuanjie. He asked if he was the guy's friend. Xiaowen asked him to keep his voice down, as the two of them were shouting loudly, and the association would be coming soon. He really didn't want to be seen here. The enemy thought that he was not afraid at all and that this guy looked very weak. He clenched his fist and noticed that the guy didn't even have muscles, which inspired him. Xiaowen said that he was right and that the boy probably had the keys, after which he approached him. Then the enemy started running up to him and exclaimed that he didn't care who he was and that he was only getting in his way. When he ran up to Xiaowen, he didn't have time to hit him, and the first slap went across his face. He was very surprised because he didn't think that this guy would be so clever. He didn't expect at all that he would dare to hit him, and looked at him with an angry look. Xiaowen said again that he had already told him to speak a little more quietly. Xin Tianxing gritted his teeth, and approaching him, exclaimed that he would finish him off now. But before he could finish speaking, Xiaowen hit him in the face with his palm again with all his might. He again asked him to stop yelling and said that he had better listen to his elders. Xin Tianxing was simply shocked by his impudence, and his blows caused him to fall to his knees. Now there were two guys lying in front of Xiaowen, one face up, the other face down. Xiaowen looked at the second one and said that he was quite strong and had endured so many blunders. He walked up to the guy and touched his hand. He felt his friend's pulse. Xiaowen was very strange, and looking at him, he exclaimed that everything was wonderful. This confirms that it was Yuanjie who defeated this guy. Suddenly he heard approaching footsteps and looked to the side, a little wary. Xiaowen realized that the association had arrived just in time, just as he finished. The boy reacted very quickly and began to cover his tracks as he ran away. The association had already approached the two men lying on the ground like corpses. The boys asked that the area be fenced off. Xiaowen escaped in time and began to approach the door. He walked back and forth across the room thoughtfully, after what had just happened. There was a guy behind the wall who thought he'd seen it all. He'd seen Xiaowen knock out such a powerful criminal with a slap. People started approaching, wondering what had happened, and whether this was a symbol of victory. Was it Yuanjie, who was undergoing a test in the reconnaissance squad by any chance? The boys were very surprised when they saw Xin Tianxing standing next to him. He was a wanted level 5 criminal. The combat team hunted him for over a month, and surprisingly, the newcomer defeated him. Their newcomers are getting stronger every time. The man asked for an ambulance to be called immediately. He also asked to be informed that there was a criminal there who needed to be questioned. The man asked Liu Kai why he was there. The boy clutched his head, unsure of what to say. Suddenly he shouted that he had seen him, and that some guy had defeated Xin Tianxing. He was wearing a headdress made of floral fabric. Then the guys asked who it was, and asked if he was from the association. Liu Kai asked to come with him because he saw where the guy went. He doesn't think he went far. The man exclaimed that he was heading straight for a dead end. But Liu Kai replied that he had definitely gone this way. He was so cool and he must have been level 5 or even level 6. Suddenly the guy looked in front of him, surprised that there was a wall in front of him, and that guy was not there. He clenched his hands and asked where he had gone. He couldn't have flown away from here. The man asked to return to the association, while intelligence would investigate the incident. He explained that there was still a lot of work to be done here. Liu Kai sadly hung his head. Then he raised his head up and asked who in the end this guy was, calling him the hero of his heart. He decided that he had to find him immediately and ask him to sign the t-shirt. Meanwhile, the boy's boss opened the door to Yuanjie's ward and asked if he was alive. Yanja noticed the boss, who also came to her, and looked at the girl. She asked how it happened that he now looked like a mummy. The boy explained to the girl that this was his enemy, and he was ready to die, but not kill him. The girl said she didn't want to hear excuses. Everything had been explained clearly during the introductory briefing. When confronted with a criminal, the first step is to report him to the association rather than attempt to eliminate him yourself. The boy didn't know what to say to the girl. She asked if it was some kind of fairy tale, some kind of introductory instruction for him. Afterwards, she asked Yuanjie to remain still when he tried to get up, otherwise he wouldn't be able to walk at all. But he managed to catch Xin Tianxing, so no one would punish him. Well, if he screws up again in the future, he might not even come anymore. Wenja said that he didn't even understand why Xin Tianxing was twice as strong as he was before. Last time, he seriously injured him, but he managed to escape. So in just 1 month, he fully recovered and became much stronger. The girl replied that she would question him when he woke up, and that he shouldn't worry about such things. Wenja asked how Xiao Wen was feeling. He said he was with him at the time, but he didn't remember anything that happened afterward. The girl replied that he was fine and had reported to her first. She asked if anyone else was nearby. Yuanjia, looking at the ceiling, replied that he didn't know. The girl then asked him to get well soon, and to inform the association when he recovered. Yuanjia wanted to say something about his opponent, but the girl interrupted him. She explained that his Yuan family was also investigating the incident, and she hoped that he would not act so impulsively in the future. She promises that she will tell him everything as soon as she has information, but the association could also forbid her. Having said this, the girl headed for the exit of the ward. She closed the door behind her and saw Xiao Wen standing next to it, leaning against the wall. The boy asked the girl if she would be able to walk in the future. Then she walked up to him and, crossing her arms over her chest, asked if he had helped Yuanjie. Xiao Wen asked if the position he had put the guy in was cool. In front of us rises a large hospital building, namely a green wide courtyard. Xiao Wen asked Lin Miao Miao why she was so worried. He asked if Yuanjie had said anything to her and handed the girl a large, delicious ice cream. Lin Miao Miao replied that he told her that he had recently seriously injured Xin Tianxing, and in less than a month, he had not only recovered, but had also become stronger than before. Xiao Wen asked how he could seriously injure him. Even in his normal state, he would not be able to compare to Tianxing. Lin Miao Miao told the boy that if she were in his place, she would also be furious. The girl began to tell Xiao Wan what happened more than 2 months ago. She explained that his sister had died a horrible death in her own yard. The Yuan family is one of the 3 leading families of the Lei Union, and his sister Yuan Shuzhen is the chairperson of the Lei Union. The girl told the boy that he had better go inside when it was raining heavily outside. She died inexplicably in her own yard, and it was just terrible. Before her death, she was brutally raped by several men. Lin Miao Miao explained to the boy that after the death of his sister, Yuanjie became obsessed with revenge. Deprived of their family's support, the Yuan family began to weaken with each passing day. A sad fate, indeed. When the girl turned towards the boy, she became very angry because he was sleeping. She exclaimed that she was telling a heartbreaking story here, and he just went and fell asleep. When Xiao Wen woke up, he replied that he didn't know why, but lately he felt very sleepy for some reason. Lin Miao Miao asked if he really hadn't heard what she had just told him. The boy answered the girl that he heard everything, and noticed that he had lost his ice cream. He wondered if Yuan Shuzhen was a weak girl. He began licking the ice cream off his fingers. Lin Miao Miao explained to the boy that his sister was a 6th level. Xiao Wen remarked that this was very strange, and asked if Yuanjie hadn't said he had seriously injured Xin Tianxing over a month ago. But he was only a level 5, so how could they have killed his sister back then? Lin Miao Miao replied that this was precisely why she said that she had inexplicably died in her own yard, and whether he had even heard her. Xiao Wen replied that he heard, and that it was very strange because maybe someone was conducting experiments on people. The girl looked at the boy and replied with a grin that the likelihood of this was very high. Xiao Wen said he witnessed Yuanjia shock himself, thus gaining super explosive strength. He asked if she had any information about the Yuan family. Lin Miao Miao replied that among all the lightning element families, only the Yuan family can do this. The association believes this increase in strength is a special ability of the Yuan family. Xiao Wen suggested that perhaps they're targeting this ability rather than the family itself. The girl said that it was indeed so. The villains learned of this ability, but the Yuan family refused to cooperate, so they struck back. Xiao Wen said that this is just their assumption, which may be consistent with the evidence currently available, but does not prove that they are experimenting on people. Lin Miao Miao said that when Xin Tianxing woke up, she would personally interrogate him. Xiao Wen asked what she was talking about. The girl replied that he had always disliked interfering in people's affairs, and why he was so concerned about the Yuan family. The boy said that gossiping is human nature, and he was just curious, nothing more. Lin Miao Miao blushed slightly, lowered her gaze, and decided to show him something. She held the phone up to Xiaowan. The boy asked what it was and picked it up. He asked if this was a forum for gossip about people with abilities and why he needed it. Lin Miao Miao explained that he was now a great celebrity on this forum. The boy started reading the correspondence, and the girl asked him if he was the same brother with the headdress. Xiaowan asked if a small child had drawn it and thought it was too ugly, but she thought it was beautifully drawn and looked just like him. Xiaowan exclaimed that he didn't care, since no one would recognize him from this drawing. It was a good thing he ran away quickly, otherwise others might have seen him. Lin Miao Miao said that this Lukai was at the crime scene and saw it clearly, so he won't leave her alone. Fortunately, she's considering his testimony and will help keep everything a secret. The boy told the girl that he had met him on the street several times, and that apparently he lived in his area. He got up from the bench and told Lin Miao Miao that he was going to deliver orders. The girl asked, surprised, if he was still going to work as a courier. Xiaowen replied that food couldn't buy itself. There won't be a bonus this month, so I'll have to work as a courier again. Lin Miao Miao listened to him, answered the phone, and asked what happened. The girl was told that Xin Tianxing had disappeared, and her look immediately changed. The day was very bright and clear, and Xiaowen exclaimed that there was nothing surprising about it. Lin Miao Miao asked him why he wasn't surprised, as if he'd known about it all along. The boy replied that it was a common occurrence for a villain with a secret to disappear at a critical moment. Doesn't this mean there really is something wrong with Xin Tianxing? He's talking about something other than murder. The girl suddenly stood up and asked the boy to go with her to the association. Xiaowen replied that he didn't have time and that he needed to finish 5 orders today. Lin Miao Miao immediately became upset and asked if he was joking. Xiaowen looked sternly into the girl's eyes and replied that he was serious and was obliged to deliver all these orders to the address. The boy turned around and said goodbye to the girl, but she started to stop him. Lin Miao Miao exclaimed while kicking the bench, saying that she was simply furious. She was very angry and asked what was wrong with him. Then she fell on the grass and grabbed her leg with her hands as she was in a lot of pain. Meanwhile, it was a colorful, bright day outside, and the high-rise buildings seemed to rise to the sky. Lin Miao Miao remained with her thoughts and was already inside the association building. She wondered how someone could disappear from the association while moving down the corridor. She gave the order to unhook the association building and asked if they had checked the video surveillance system on all floors. The girl with a notepad in her hands replied that there was nothing suspicious in any of the videos. She was Lin Miao Miao's 4th-level secretary, with the instant amnesia skill. She explained that he simply vanished without a trace. Perhaps the CCTV cameras were hacked, which was what Lin Miao Miao was curious about. The secretary explained to her boss that they had already been checked by someone from the technical department. She looked at the girl and replied that they were fine. Lin Miao Miao looked at her and wondered how he managed to escape back then. Unless someone used spatial abilities. She told her secretary that she needed a list of people in the association who had spatial abilities. Then the secretary asked her if she suspected that there was a spy in their association. Lin Miao Miao looked at the girl and said that she was not consulting with her, but simply that she had to carry out her orders. Then the secretary bowed her head to her boss and replied that she obeyed her. Lin Miao Miao thought that as soon as she left, he disappeared, and this was very strange. The employee also wanted to say something, but he didn't even have time to open his mouth. The boss got angry and asked if they had seen him disappear with their own eyes. The man said he'd only looked down and raised his head, but Xin Tianxing had already disappeared. A second officer confirmed this, saying he'd vanished in a split second. Someone was waiting for the moment when they turned away, and he disappeared. Lin Miao Miao looked at them sternly. She crossed her arms over her chest and asked to see all the CCTV footage. Lin Miao Miao walked into another room and saw her sister sitting at the table. She turned her head in her direction and asked if her sister had returned. Ike asked her sister how Yuanja was doing. Lin Miao Miao put her hand to her head. She sat down on the sofa and replied that everything was fine, but she had no time for him at the moment. Ike asked her sister what was wrong because she noticed that she was not in a very good mood. Lin Miao Miao gave her a very worried look and explained that Xin Tianxing had disappeared. Ike was also very surprised and asked how this was possible, since it was an association. Could someone have freed him on purpose? Lin Miao Miao replied that it was quite possible, and what irritated her most was that he had disappeared under the surveillance of the reconnaissance squad, and that she would be to blame for it again. Ike handed her sister the card and said someone had slipped it into the door. She went in to check the data, but as soon as she opened the door, it fell to the floor. She examined it for half a day and did not find anything special. It seemed to be an ordinary card. Lin Miao Miao picked it up and said that it had a triangle symbol on it that sometimes meant warnings. Yike became worried and asked if Xin Tianxing's disappearance could be connected to this card. But how could this card have appeared around the same time Xin Tianxing disappeared? The sister replied in a very serious tone that everything connected with him was very strange. She originally thought she could ask Xin Tianxing about the Yuan family, but he ran away. Ike lowered her gaze and said that before she came in, she had just finished reading the Yuan family file, and she felt too sorry for that guy. If he also finds out that Xin Tianxing has escaped, he will be very upset. Lin Miao Miao replied that they had to find Xin Tianxing before Yuanjia was discharged from the hospital. As for this card that her sister brought her, she will send it for verification. Ike lowered her head thoughtfully and then chuckled, after which she perked up. She asked her sister if she'd seen the post about her little brother wearing a floral headdress. Now everyone is talking about him, and there is even a group of people who are constantly looking for him. Lin Miao Miao suddenly stood up from the sofa and walked very close to her sister. She leaned towards her ear and explained that the little brother with the flower cloth headdress was Xiao Wen. Ike was very surprised and her look changed. She clenched her fists, and her eyes began to bulge from their sockets from such strong surprise. Lin Miao Miao approached her sister again and asked her to be a little quieter. The girl couldn't come to her senses when she learned such shocking news. Meanwhile, Xiao Wen was already inside and ready to deliver orders. The man sat at the bar, clutching his head. He asked the boy if he'd quit, as Xiao Wen hadn't shown up for several days. Xiao Wen told the man that he hadn't quit. He had just recently found another part-time job. He said goodbye and said he was going to make deliveries. The man wished him luck. He thought the boy was simply brilliant. He'd have to introduce him to that man somehow. And now Xiao Wen has already approached his moped and went to deliver orders. Suddenly people began to look up into the sky, and he too became interested in what was there. He became curious why these people were all looking at the sky, and he decided to look too. The boy looked up and was simply surprised when he saw strange flying machines above his head. He couldn't understand what this was and whether these were really spaceships. These devices really did look like huge spaceships. He began to look at them more closely and thought that there was an alien standing on one of them. This reminded him of something, and he began to think. The boy decided to learn how to prevent people from dying. He started riding his moped even faster and decided it was an alien invasion. A group of people were just deciding whether the association was responsible for this and whether they really had a spaceship in front of them. If it's an alien invasion, they don't need to take any action. They're waiting for notification from the Ministry of Defense. This is what Ning Ye, Secretary of the Logistics Department, said. The spaceships continued to fly, and suddenly one of them fired a fiery salvo. The beam of fire hit the houses straight down, and a powerful explosion occurred, and a fire blazed all around. The people realized that this was definitely an enemy, and they had to be very careful. A disaster had come to their city. The guy with glasses told his brother that the situation was not the best, and they opened fire on ordinary people. Are they really going to wait for notification? He's asking for at least some help. Ning Ye was the head of the logistics department. After some thought, he asked that the cleansing department be placed in a position to act jointly with other departments of the country. The guy stood up from his chair and said, clenching his fists, that it was time to report to the higher-ups. The boys grouped together and headed down the corridor. Ning Ye asked his brother to come with him, and so he and his brother arrived at the room where the gray-haired old man was. When they entered, the old man rose from his chair and greeted the boys right there. The other chairs were already occupied by warriors who had gathered for the meeting. There was Wang Zhenyan, the vice president of the association, who was a very stern man with a mustache. Also there was a serious man in sunglasses, Xuan Tian, the association's vice president. Yue Hanbin, the association's vice president. And also the guy who looked very strange, Bao Dao, is also the vice president of the association. The gray-haired old man's name was Zuo Ye Qianji, and he was the association's president. Looking at his comrades, the old man said that it was not yet time to take any action. Ningyi explained to the president that they were attacking civilians. As a branch of the public security department, they had to engage immediately. But the old man explained to the boys that they had to wait for instructions from the Ministry of Defense. The boy began to get indignant and said that while they waited, a huge number of innocent people would die. Xuantian exclaimed that the invaders possessed a power unknown to them. It was not a given that their abilities would be able to harm them, and that was beyond their control. Therefore, they must simply wait. Ningyi also became indignant in response and asked how they could not help people but sit and wait. Bao Dao sat sprawled on the sofa, and holding his head in his hand, said that he had no idea and let them decide for themselves. Yue Hanbing said they can't even help people without permission. They are government organizations and are required to wait for instructions from higher authorities. Wang Jianyan became indignant and asked why they were all so afraid. He didn't care about weapons. He wasn't even afraid of nuclear bombs. The president looked seriously at the boys and asked them to give him time to think everything over. Wang Jianyan turned towards the white-haired old man and wanted to say something to the master. Ning Ye suddenly interrupted them and exclaimed that he would then help as an ordinary civilian. The president immediately asked him to stop, and then Brother Ning Ye bowed before him and said that they would wait for his decision. And then came the sunny, clear morning. After the alien attack, there was much destruction. Meanwhile, Xiaowen was riding a moped and began to approach a certain area. He was in Shu Xiaowen's area and looked at the smoke billowing right in front of him. He felt very sad about what the unknown aliens who invaded their land were doing. He stopped and got off his moped, looking up at the flying ships. Meanwhile, a girl with long hair and a long dress stood in the middle of the ship. She looked at the man who was sitting on the chair in front of her and tried to stand still. Meanwhile, the guy was wolfing down the food and thinking about something of his own. After which he glanced at the girl. He looked at her with a stern gaze and asked what the result was. The girl in glasses explained to the guy that the test results had not reached 100%. Then the guy stopped eating and, smiling, replied that this was something new. He became very interested and broke into a wide smile as he thought about it again. The guy looked at him with surprised eyes and exclaimed that this planet must be fun. Outside, clouds of smoke rose to the sky, making it difficult to breathe. Xiaowen put his flowered headscarf back on and said that he would stick to his busy work schedule. He clenched his fists and exclaimed that this was his hard-earned peaceful life. The boy decided to walk through the clouds of smoke and debris because it was his 80-year pension. He drew his eyebrows together and began to make his way through the explosions and columns of smoke. There was a new explosion and the earth flew around, dropping pieces and fragments of rocks. Suddenly, a man began to approach the boy and called him his idol. He caught up with the guy and threw himself into his arms, accidentally knocking him to the ground. He said that he had finally found him and called him his idol or even God. He called the boy the god of hats. Xiaowen grabbed his head and asked who he was, and apparently he was mistaken. But the guy started crying without letting go of his leg and said that he was definitely not mistaken. He called him his god again, tears welling in his eyes. He is the god of hats, their father, the savior of the world, the universal slayer of all beings, and they love him. He kept repeating that they loved him, and said that the holy light shines for every headdress, the coolest and most powerful one. He is the god of headdresses. Everyone needs to line up and not crowd so that everyone can give their love to the god of headdresses. The guy continued to repeat this and blushed, casting his gaze to the sky without letting go of Xiaowen's leg. But the boy responded by calling him sick and kicking him to get lost immediately. The boy replied that as soon as the explosion happened, he immediately realized he was supposed to be here, and let him not even think about denying it because he was sued for his work in a marketing company. If he works with him, he'll make him the most popular. Xiaowen thought about it. The guy smiled and exclaimed that he was telling the truth and he would be popular #1. Suddenly, Xiaowen slapped him in the face with his palm, using physical amnesia in the form of a strong blow with his right hand. The boy explained as he left that there was no #1 in his dictionary, and turned around and headed towards the moped. Suddenly, Ike appeared in front of him, and looking at the boy, she asked how it happened. Xiaowen waved at her and exclaimed that she had arrived just in time. He asked her to hurry up and help him hypnotize this guy. He explained to the girl, being very upset, that it seemed like this guy recognized him. Ike covered her mouth with her hand and called him the god of headdresses, and he really knows her. Xiaowen looked at the girl with a smile and explained to Wang Yik who he really was. Meanwhile, on the ship, the guy continued to sit in his chair with his legs spread out on the table. The girl told Brother San that they had just discovered someone strong at the point of the explosion, but suddenly, he disappeared again. San started screaming and asked to bring him his cyclotron-accelerated Armstrong jet gun. A huge, powerful cannon of incredible size immediately appeared in front of him. The guy got ready to shoot and smiled slyly, wanting to tear everyone to pieces. And so the first salvo flew out of this alien ship and flew towards the enemy. Xiaowen noticed the danger approaching him faster and faster. He immediately took his comrades, one by one hand, the other by the other, and pulled them towards him. He made an incredible maneuver and rode the volley that had just been fired in his direction. He managed to lead his friends away from danger, and a powerful explosion occurred, such that the earth flew apart around him. A man from the crowd exclaimed that the enemy had begun the attack again, and that it might be time to stop waiting. These were people from the association, and they were saying that this wasn't something ordinary people could handle. Hadn't the president given the order yet? Suddenly, One of them pointed to the monitor and asked the others to look as he saw a survivor. The boys were very surprised and began to look at the monitor, blushing a little. Xiaowen held 2 people while carrying them out of the very thick gray smoke. Finally, he got out of there, and on his head, there was a bright flower headband shining. He was a hero to everyone and saved his comrades from a powerful, violent explosion. Xiaowen clenched his fists seriously and looked at the girl, exclaiming that there was no end to this. Wang Yike glanced at the boy's pants and told him that his pant leg was torn. Xiaowen told the girl that it was just a human organ and there was no need to panic. Wang Yike blushed seriously and looked away to avoid looking where she shouldn't. Xiaowen was angry because of something else, as he noticed that the aliens had destroyed his house. They also brazenly burned his trouser leg and wanted to end his life. He clenched his fists and, kneeling down, decided that now there would be no mercy for them. Xiaowen looked up at the sky and exclaimed that today, either he would destroy them or they would destroy him. He looked at the sky and shouted this, waiting for some kind of answer. But there were no spaceships above his head. The sun was shining as usual. Xiaowen continued to gaze upward at the sun shining above him. It was as if the ship hadn't been there just a few minutes ago. The boy couldn't understand how they could disappear so quickly. That meant their level of technology was much higher than this planet's. He clenched his teeth in anger and rage because he really wanted revenge, but he still had to find them. The boy called them perverts as he emerged from the thick gray clouds of smoke into the white light. He snapped 2 fingers and a bright flash occurred, dispersing the smoke. He lit up in bright yellow rays, being a hero for the girl and for his admirer who called him an idol. Xiaowen decided that it would be better this way, and the girl exclaimed, closing her eyes, that it was too bright. Meanwhile, the guy who called him an idol began to open his eyes. When he came to his senses, he immediately glanced towards Xiaowen. It was as if he saw God in front of him. The boy called him the God of Hats again, extending his hand towards him. When Xiaowen knocked him out again, he said that this guy needed a strong dose of hypnosis. Otherwise, sooner or later, he would remember what he did, and that was really a problem. The girl slowly opened her eyes and asked them to leave it to her. The light was so strong that she barely opened her eyes. The guys from the association were already approaching the thick smoke, and one of them exclaimed that there was a strong light in the center of the explosion and they needed to go check it out. They needed to carefully check for survivors and quickly call for medical assistance. Xiaowen noticed they arrived very quickly. He decided that if they saw him, he would be in the headlines tomorrow, and he didn't need that. The boy grabbed the girl by the collar and quickly dragged her away from that place. They disappeared very quickly, and in their place only clouds of thick white smoke remained. Meanwhile, the group had already arrived and made their way to where the boys had just been. They found only the guy lying on the ground, looking contented. Meanwhile, Lin Miao Miao sat on the chair with her phone in her hands, thinking about something. She looked at the phone, looking very serious. Suddenly, it seemed to her that someone appeared in the room and she became a little wary. A bright light shone in the room, and she got up from her chair and asked who it was. The light was too bright and the girl didn't know how to react to it. She was a little scared. She was very surprised when she saw Xiaowen and her sister Wang Yike in front of her. The girl explained to the boy and her sister that his appearance was too unexpected. Wang Yike explained to her sister that their house had been bombed and asked where they would now spend the night. Lin Miao Miao replied that she already knew everything. Xiaowen was surprised that the girl even prepared new pants for him. Lin Miao Miao exclaimed that all the association's surveillance cameras had been destroyed by the light from his lower body. Luckily, he was wearing a headscarf. Otherwise, everyone would have recognized him. Xiaowen, holding his head with his hand, explained that it was by chance that he asked to go to his parents today, since it was not far from here. He thought that in the end, he had collected money from them for their accommodation, and now he had to return it. But he had no money. It was already dark outside and bright lights were burning in the houses. Girls started approaching the house because it was necessary to decide where to spend the night. The sisters were already near the large high gates, heading towards them. Uncle Wang, Xiaowen's parents' servant, appeared at the door. He asked if the young master had finally returned. The boy stood in front of the man, looking at him. He asked if his parents were home. He explained to his uncle that something had happened and he would have to live at home with his girlfriends for a while. Uncle Wang replied with a smile that his parents were at home, and it was better not to leave the house this time. Xiaowen turned away from the man and said that he was unlikely to be able to stay here for long. Meanwhile, the uncle had already informed the gentleman and lady that the young gentleman had returned. Xu Xian, the boy's father, called him a brat and asked how he dared to come back. The boy's mother, Bai Zhuzhen, blushed and almost burst into tears and called him a stinker. After that, she hugged the boy and, holding him close, called him stinky again with tears in her eyes. When they saw 2 girlfriends, they wondered if this was a problem or if everything was fine. Lin Meow Meow gave them a stern look and blushed, thinking that she had heard everything. If they had a son, the mother thought, they would name him Shu Shilin, and if a daughter, then Shu Xiao King. That was certainly fine, but what about the great-grandson and great-granddaughter? They've already thought of names for their grandchildren and are thinking of ones for their great-grandchildren. The mother announced that dinner was almost ready and asked them to go watch TV in the living room for now. Father asked Uncle Wang to have dinner prepared in the kitchen as quickly as possible. Xiao Wen noticed that his parents hadn't changed at all. The girls became a little wary when they heard a sound. Lin Meow Meow realized that the boy's father, Shu Xianhua, was a doctor. She remembers his face, and from time to time it makes headlines. Bai Shuzhen walked towards the door and told her son that she would bring something. The father asked his son and the girls what they wanted for dinner, smiling sweetly at them. Xiao Wen thought for a moment and became wary, wondering what his mother wanted to bring him. The woman headed to a certain room and approached a huge iron safe. She took out a golden box from there and, smiling, said that this day had finally come. Shushen told the boys that he would go see what was going on in the kitchen and headed towards the door. Lin Meow Meow told him that they understood him, and the man immediately walked out the door. He again asked the guys to have fun while he went to sort out dinner. He closed the door behind him and said to the boys that he would be there soon. Xiao Wen was trying to let off some steam. Shushen was approaching the kitchen door. Before he could arrive, he saw his wife squatting with a sad look. The man approached her and asked if everything was ready. The woman turned to him and, taking out some kind of bag, answered, looking angrily, that of course it was ready. She explained to her husband that she had just poured a whole handful into the house's ventilation system. In less than 10 seconds, it will all begin. After so many years of waiting, they will finally have grandchildren. The uncle tried to explain to the master and mistress that this was not entirely correct. But before he could finish speaking, they turned to him and asked what he knew about the love of parents for their children. The man immediately began to do as they instructed and turned on the fan. Wang Yik, looking at the plate of red fish, exclaimed that his family was very rich. Lin Meow Meow also asked if he would inherit his family's wealth. Xiao Wen replied that his parents were wealthy. He explained that he hadn't even finished kindergarten and didn't know how to run a company. His parents had long ago drawn up a will stating that all their property would go to his children, and if he didn't have any children, they would donate everything. He thought that if he were to manage the company, he might accidentally become the first in the world, and that would be his death. The boy no longer knew, looking at his girlfriends, whether to be happy or to cry. Lin Meow Meow noticed his parents were acting strangely. They'd only just arrived, and his mother and father had already thought up names for their grandchildren. Wang Yike lowered her gaze, blushed a little, and said that he had a good family, and that she would like one too. Xiao Wen wondered what it was and looked up at the ceiling. 10 seconds must have passed. Smoke began to emerge from the ventilation grill. The boy asked the girls to hold their breath immediately. Lin Meow Meow looked up. She covered her mouth with her hand and, closing one eye, asked what it was. The countdown began, and there were only 8 seconds left. It was already difficult to see because of the smoke. Xiao Wen approached Wang Yeke and covered her mouth with his hand, asking her not to breathe because she urgently needed to leave the house. There was only a little time left, just 6 seconds. Smoke continued to come out of the ventilation hatch. The girls began to stand up very slowly, and, holding their breath, they had to walk out slowly. With only 4 seconds remaining, Xiao Wen clamped his hand over Wang Yike's mouth and asked what was wrong with her. There were only a few seconds left, and the smoke turned from white to purple. Wang Yik pushed the boy away and asked him to quickly leave here, as she felt excited. Of course, she didn't say anything about it, but she asked the boy not to approach him. She was really in a strange state, and blushing, she kindly asked to move away from her. Xiao Wen was a little scared because he realized that it could even penetrate the skin. He exclaimed that his parents had spent a fortune. Wang Yike fell to her knees, sighing heavily. Lin Meow Meow looked at her sister and said that her abilities were getting out of control. She exclaimed that it was too late. If the power of her hypnosis was completely out of control, then no one would be able to do anything. It will be impossible to even resist. Xiao Wen asked Lin Meow Meow what was wrong with her. The boy asked Wang Yik to try to control himself and not give in to this force. But the girl blushed and replied that she couldn't, and what should she do about it now? She explained, getting down on all fours, that she didn't know what was happening to her body. The boy began to extend his hand towards her and said that he would help her. She just needed to trust him. Xiao Wen explained that he would try to make her lose consciousness temporarily, and that should help. Wang Yike again began to ask not to touch her, as a simple touch could become a problem. But the boy again asked the girl to trust him and smiled a little. He walked up to her and immediately hugged her. Xiao Wen explained as he hugged her that everything would be okay. There was a bright flash, and the purple color in the form of lightning began to rise higher and higher. The whole room was enveloped in a bright purple light, and the girls were lying on the floor. Meanwhile, my parents and Uncle Wang were standing outside the door waiting. The mother was very worried, and they wondered what was going on, and if everything was okay. The father crossed his arms over his chest and told his wife that she was not imagining things, and that it was all a phantom. The mother explained that she used her unique secret method and violent charms. She couldn't believe she couldn't control her son. Uncle glanced at Shu Shen and said that Xiaowen was very lucky this time. We are talking about a phantom, namely a demon that seduces people in dreams and visions. They are the masters of the dream world and can deprive a person of the five senses and create a subspace where even God cannot penetrate. The legend says that if a person and a phantom make love, the person will die. Xiaowen stood in the courtyard outside next to Lin Miao Miao. They looked straight ahead. The girl suddenly glanced up and chuckled. The boy explained to Lin Miao Miao that this was bad and that they had fallen into an illusion. They became very interested and went further along the path through the thicket of the forest. Lin Miao Miao said that last time he fell into Wang Yihan's illusion. She wondered how he'd gotten out of there. The boy looked ahead, lost in thought. He answered the girl that he no longer remembered it. Lin Miao Miao was suddenly surprised by something, and her gaze changed dramatically. She accidentally bumped into Xiaowen's back, hitting her head directly on it. The girl grabbed her nose with her hand and asked why he suddenly stopped. Xiaowen looked at the girl and asked if she was bored. Lin Miao Miao smiled back and said that she was unused to the fact that Xiaowen, whom she knew, chatted so often. The boy replied that in any case they were stuck here and needed to find something to talk about. Lin Miao Miao muttered that she couldn't hear what he was saying and asked him to find Wang Yike quickly. After all, this was an illusory realm and they shouldn't linger here. Xiaowen exclaimed that if she looked into the abyss for a long time, the abyss would also look at her. The girl looked down and said that it was impolite to eavesdrop on other people's thoughts. Xiaowen replied that she started it herself, and deep inside her there were such lustful thoughts. Lin Miao Miao became angry again and asked him to stop talking about it immediately. She pulled the boy towards her and said that if he heard them, she asked him to forget and not dare to speak. Xiaowen approached the girl and, looking into her eyes, said that she had told him something similar herself. He began to move even closer to her, and she asked him to stop and cease. She promised that if he came closer to her, she would not vouch for herself. And she asked not to forget that she was able to rise step by step to the position of head of the intelligence detachment because she does everything that is required of her. The boy turned his back to her and, smiling, replied that he believed that she could do it herself. He said that he knew the secrets of many people through their own thoughts, but he just tries not to take it seriously and think about it less. Xiaowen said that Wang Yike should be right ahead somewhere, right where they were going. Lin Miao Miao became worried and asked not to go there because it was too dangerous. But the boy replied that if he didn't go there, they wouldn't be able to get out of here. Lin Miao Miao said that in general, the third-level illusion shouldn't be that strong. Xiaowen said that if this was a third-level illusion, they would have left here long ago. Looking ahead, the boy explained to the girl that she was stronger than they thought. Meanwhile, evening had already arrived, which turned into a bright moonlit and starry night. Xiaowen and Lin Miao Miao walked into the wide room and noticed that the atmosphere had changed as Wang Yike was kneeling in front of them. Xiaowen said that he didn't expect to see such an old castle and thought it would be something more majestic. But again, given Wang Yike's modest nature, this is quite understandable. Lin Miao Miao asked if he was trying to think logically in the illusory space. But to destroy the illusion, logical thinking alone is not enough. They continued to watch the girl, who was kneeling in the illusion. Lin Miao Miao noticed that Yike had woken up. Wang Yike stood up from her knees and walked towards the boy and her sister. Lin Miao Miao noticed that it seemed like Wang Yike had forgotten them, and she wasn't attacking them. But how could they defeat her? The girl was already standing in front of them, her arms crossed over her stomach. The boy looked at her and said that she had already attacked. Lin Miao Miao gave him a questioning look, not understanding what he meant. The girl extended her hand forward as if she wanted to get something or show it. After that, she opened her palm very wide and looked sweetly at the boys. Lin Miao Miao was very surprised and asked what this all meant. Xiaowen explained that she was a phantom and chose him. What did she think that could mean? Lin Miao Miao was a little frightened and exclaimed that she couldn't be a phantom. Then the boy asked her to look for herself, and it was as if he opened a veil for her. Wasn't that a phantom before them? Wang Yike's eyes glowed with a snow-white emptiness. Xiaowen began to approach the girl and said that he would go help her. But Lin Miao Miao didn't like it very much and tried to stop him. But the girl realized that she needed to save her sister and asked him to be careful. She was worried about Xiaowen. The boy turned to her and asked her not to worry. But Lin Miao Miao clenched her fists and asked how she could not worry about him in this situation. After all, he knows that the phantom can take his life if something goes wrong. Showin smiled back at her and exclaimed that there was nothing scary about death. Lin Miao Miao was even more surprised by his words. How could he not be afraid of death? The boy was already approaching her little sister, who was waiting for him with a smile. She spread her arms and threw a bunch of beautiful snow-white feathers in his direction. After that, her clothes fell off and she was completely naked. Wang Yi clung to the boy. She pressed her whole body against him, completely naked and with her hair loose. Xiao Wen, when she clung to him, asked him if she didn't want to not force herself to do it. Wang Yi looked back at him with a very sweet and tender look and began to hug him even tighter. After that, she pressed her lips to the boy's and they merged in a passionate kiss. Lin Miao Miao didn't expect this and her gaze changed, causing her to blush deeply. She asked if everything was okay, and beads of sweat began to run down her cheeks. Xiao Wen turned towards his sister after they kissed. Wang Yi pulled away a little, but the boy pressed her to himself and asked her not to get distracted. Lin Miao Miao became very angry and asked Xiao Wen what he was doing. Wang Yi immediately glanced towards her sister, and her gaze was full of anger and hatred. She waved her hand in her direction and wanted the girl to die. Lin Miao Miao exclaimed that all men are the same. When they see a beautiful woman, they can't act differently. Before she could finish speaking, Wang Yi waved her hand again, and a bright purple flame flew towards her. Lin Miao Miao became very nervous and exclaimed that she was wrong about him. Xiao Wen tried to attract the girl to him again and asked her not to stop, but rather to continue. He silently called Lin Miao Miao stupid. Wang Yi had already begun to use her abilities to attack the girl. The boy got really angry and asked her to get out of there immediately. A bright purple light flew towards the girl in the form of lightning. Lin Miao Miao exclaimed that he couldn't kick her out of here and how dare he say such a thing to her. She called him a shameless scoundrel and decided that he was only a third-level person, so she had nothing to fear. She was about to not let herself be offended, but to try to attack, and suddenly she tripped over a stone. A powerful explosion occurred nearby and sharp, huge stones flew in all directions. The girl started screaming because she was very scared, and her sister's gaze was hateful and angry. Xiao Wen caught Lin Miao Miao just in time, picking her up and preventing her from falling. When he took the girl in his arms, he looked into her eyes and asked if she was a fool. If that attack had hit her, she would never have been in reality again. Lin Miao Miao lowered her gaze and chuckled, blushing slightly at her actions. Wang Yi smiled sarcastically and said that anyone who stood in her way would surely die. Xiao Wen noticed Wang Yi's great strength. Lin Miao Miao asked what he had done with her. The boy replied, looking at her with disdain, that she was the one doing the wrong thing, and he almost destroyed that illusion. Then the girl asked how he destroyed the illusion by kissing her passionately. Xiao Wen replied sadly that he was afraid it would not be easy to destroy this illusion now. Lin Miao Miao said that he was able to easily break Wang Yi's illusion. So was it really that much more difficult this time? Xiao Wen replied that illusion was like quicksand, and the more it pressed, the deeper it sank you. He talked about how he and Wang Yi were complete opposites. The girl waved her hand again and sharp green roots began to emerge from the floor. These roots enveloped the girl and began to grow stronger and stronger around the entire perimeter. They were already beginning to approach the boy and Lin Miao Miao. There were a lot of them, and they were growing from different directions. Lin Miao Miao exclaimed in fear. It seemed like she was trying to lure them into a trap. Xiao Wen asked the girl not to move, to simply try not to notice these roots. Then she asked if he couldn't read her thoughts and find a way out of here. Xiao Wen replied that he had tried. Wang Yi was in front of them, more like a door than a thinking human being. He explained that mind reading had no effect on her, and that she was very strong. Lin Miao Miao was seriously scared and asked what he meant about the door. The boy explained that this meant she would only allow this to trusted people. If she resisted, the girl would see her as an enemy. Lin Miao Miao asked fearfully what would happen if he was wrong and tried to follow his advice. Xiao Wen said that in any case, it was too late to worry about it and he was used to dying. Lin Miao Miao told the boy that she hadn't bought herself new leather boots yet and didn't want to die. Wang Yi continued to stand there with a blank look, completely enveloped by tree roots. The girl looked ahead and directed all these roots against her opponents, and they completely enveloped them in the form of a ball. Wang Yi did not stop and decided that they had already suffocated in the middle of this lump. But suddenly the roots began to disappear as if dissolving, and bright, colorful, beautiful butterflies began to fly out of this tangle.